Faites appel, s'il vous plaît, monsieur le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelade.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Gruville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Southern. Madame le deputy Labby.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Tadier. Monsieur le deputy Luce. Madame le deputy Dublé.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Morel.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Lehegara. Monsieur le deputy Ayer.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Alves.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Gardner.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Gorse.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Farnham.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Moore. Monsieur le deputy Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Ozef. Monsieur le deputy Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Coles.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Poré. Monsieur le deputy War.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Miles.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Renouf.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Curtis.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Binet. Madame le deputy Jeune. Madame le deputy Miller.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Howell.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Binet. Monsieur le deputy Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Kovac.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Curtis.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Ward.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Andrews.
Monsieur le greffier.
Prions Dieu. Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et les puissances de la terre pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée les dons de conseil et de prudence, d'unir le cœur et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent et de les conduire tellement, toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toute leur délibération étant accompagnée de ta bénédiction, réussisse au bien et au soulagement du peuple qui t'a plu de commettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant « Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite en la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous induis point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi est le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen. Madame la connétable de Saint-Laurent.
So, Madame Le Connétable is attending hospital with a close family member. Could I ask that she be excused, please?
Excusez.
Monsieur le deputy Tadier.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Joseph.
Deputy Joseph is travelling back from being out of the island on state's business. He should be in the chamber later today.
So I wanted to ask yesterday, what is the state's business?
Are you able to assist?
I believe he was attending the Commonwealth Investment Forum, which was a day-long event and an evening function, and he also attended another function during the evening.
Very well. State's business.
Madame la deputy Poré.
Les états sont constitués.
Sir, may I inform the chamber that I'll be attending a funeral later on this morning, sir?
Thank you very much, Connétable.
Sir, I have a medical appointment at 11 a.m. Shouldn't be away long, sir.
Very well, thank you for giving that notification. We resume the debate on P76 and Deputy Farnham's amendment, which we were debating when the Assembly rose last evening. Next scheduled to speak on those who have indicated a desire to speak is Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. And I thank Deputy Farnham for the thought he has given to his amendment. The Deputy raised some issues in his speech that I believe need to be followed up. In particular, the problems a 4-year term for all states members presents for government continuity. Having reflected on the 2 speeches that followed his opening speech, I'm inclined to support his amendment, and I will now explain why. Constable Shaheen may have been tired yesterday. His speech didn't consider the value of the amendment or to seek the reasons why I'm bringing this proposition. So let me please remind States members of the reasons for reinstating senators that were set out in my report, in its addendum, and in my opening speech. These related to improving inclusivity in the States Chamber, optimising resourcing of the Assembly's governance functions, and creating efficiencies in public spending. I talked of improved accessibility, giving people like hard-working immigrants and finance workers, who represent 40% of the workforce in the island, the opportunity of having a direct voice in the States Assembly using a route that can work better for them. These are serious issues, pivotal to the future success of this island's management of public finances and its economy. We are politicians. Yes, it's important to learn from those we represent, but our main role is to learn from each other. And this is particularly important when organising how we can best deliver value on behalf of islanders. Our increased inclusivity in this chamber right now should give us fresh eyes if we do not choose to be willfully blind. Thank you. Constable Shaheen referred to a way of enabling immigrants to vote. Although his suggestion has merit, it doesn't address my arguments regarding accessibility to this chamber for immigrants or those whose reach amongst the electorate is island-wide rather than localised. The simple truth is that only some members of this Assembly can be the voice for the lived experience of the immigrant, of the finance worker, seeking to offer his or her skills in public service and to insist in governance and representation. When Constable Shaheen resigned from the Council of Ministers, he expressed concerns regarding public spending. Yet he did not comment on the financial efficiencies that arise from the duplication of costs of constituency roles at all. If he has read the addendum, he will have gauged how the costs of this system are stacking up already just at the stage of initial development. Is he a supporter of efficient public spending? Or is he paying just lip service to that, as well as the principle of improved inclusivity in this States Chamber?
Sir, can I raise a point of order?
Yes, you can.
Entirely sure that these speeches... I'm not entirely sure that these speeches are relevant to the amendment. There seems to be another attempt...
The speech is an amendment, and it is always... of course, there's always a balance to be struck between a member's right to speak and to traverse the points that they believe are relevant and important. And it's only when it crosses a certain threshold, I think, that the presiding officer feels compelled to intervene and question the relevance. But general political statements about the political views of other members on other unrelated matters seem to me to be difficult to fall within that definition of relevance. So, Deputy Scott, you've heard the intervention, and your speech obviously should be tied in relevance purely to the acceptance, which I now understand you do accept, as opposed to the position you took at the beginning of this debate, acceptance of the amendment of Deputy Farnham.
Thank you, sir.
Because you'll speak again on your own proposition
No,
after
absolutely,
that.
sir.
Yes.
I will return to the actual, to Deputy Tadye speaking in his amendment, because basically he did speak to the amendment, and I will follow on from there, sir. Thank you.
I'm just going to ask on the ruling, so is it also the fact that when we speak to an amendment, we should also say why we think the amendment is better than not having the amendment, and why it makes the original proposition better than if it didn't have the amendment?
I'm loath to give prescriptive directions as to what members should say in their speech, but one might logically assume that anyone speaking to an amendment would say it's a good amendment because it does this, or it's a bad amendment because it does that, or doesn't do. One would logically assume that, but I'm certainly not going to give a direction about it, Deputy.
And I'm
Thank you.
sure the Chamber is waiting with bated breath, sir, so I'll continue to explain.
Yes, I didn't. This is not intended to knock you off your course at all, Deputy Scott, of course. Please do continue.
Thank you, sir. So, Deputy Tadye spoke to the, and I thank him for speaking to the amendment and for recognising my original thinking regarding the value in having the PPC work through the numbers in terms of constituency representation. Obviously, Deputy Farnham's amendment doesn't actually give the PPC this opportunity, or some might say work. The addendum to the proposition sets out the Venice Commission principles that have served as a guide in evening out voting numbers across constituencies. But we remain with the reality discovered by the former PPC that it is difficult to make the numbers work perfectly, particularly in small and unique populations such as Jersey. There is room for follow-up, and I would be happy to work with the Deputy to propose further adjustments. Deputy Tadye did not speak about any numbers in the context of public spending. In fact, he suggested in a previous debate that controlling public spending is a big concern to him, which I hope was a joke, because I think public spending isn't a joke. But I do have difficulties in reconciling Deputy Tadye's speech with the Electoral Commission's stance that the balance of states' members' activities should be geared towards island-wide work. In my experience, Deputy Tadye has informed at least one islander who has contacted all of the St Gellard's representatives that Deputy Tadye prioritised his own constituents. When the Deputy mentioned scrutiny, he failed to mention that he isn't on a scrutiny panel himself. Now, I don't object to the Deputy prioritising constituency work over scrutiny participation, despite the value that he could bring to my own panel as a former Assistant Minister.
So would the Deputy give way?
For a point of clarification?
It may be a point of order, because I think it's misleading the
Well,
Assembly, but I would hope she would give way.
Well, it can only be a point of clarification of your speech, and you have spoken in this part of the debate, so you can clarify your speech, or you can ask her to clarify a point of hers, but only if she gives way. Do you give way?
What exactly is it?
No.
Oh, yes, I'll give way.
I'm sorry.
Happy to clarify.
You either continue to speak, Deputy Scott, or you give way.
Sorry, sir, I give way.
Very well.
So it's misleading and not true to say I'm not on a scrutiny panel, because I am on a sub-panel, and we still had a meeting this week. I was part of the, and I said that in my speech.
I think you must express that. Would the Deputy clarify whether you are in fact a member of any panel? But I think you've said what you wanted to say.
I am clarifying.
But we really do have to try and keep within the rules of debate within the chamber. And Deputy Scott, please do carry on.
So the Deputy gave way, and it is to make a point of clarification. So I'm simply clarifying what I did say in my speech, actually, is that I have been on a scrutiny panel. It happens to be a sub-panel, and it had just as much work in that review, which we're still looking at. And I met with the panel this week to consider the Minister's response to that, which we're still working through. So it's an ongoing panel that I'm on. So it's simply not true to say that I'm not on a scrutiny panel.
Well,
I don't think that was a point or clarification that being asked, and I'm sorry that the deputy has...
Well, I'm not going to get into a debate
Yeah.
as to what standing
however,
orders are
he's
being
had said
followed.
his piece, sir.
Please don't talk across me, Deputy.
Sorry.
I'm not going to get into a debate as to what standing orders are being followed or not being followed, because a fair number of them are being stretched to the limit, certainly, of my tolerance. And so if we will continue, if you'd stay on the matter of the amendment, and then the debate will progress.
Right. I will apologise to the deputy for not mentioning that he is on a sub-panel of scrutiny, indeed. Now, coming back to what I was saying, I don't object to the deputy prioritising constituency work over scrutiny participation, full scrutiny participation, sorry, sir, despite the value that he could bring to my own panel as a former Assistant Minister for Arts and Culture. But I am troubled by the publicly funded time I am wasting informing Deputy Tadier of actions I have taken regarding constituency matters without receiving a similar courtesy from him by...
Deputy Scott,
Sorry.
could you please explain to the Assembly and to me why this is relevant to whether Deputy Farnham's amendment should be accepted or not? It could be that it is, but I can't immediately see it, I'm afraid.
Sir, in an ideal world, PPC would be making more sense out of this messiness, which is what, and the messiness I am talking about are things like the actual need to adjust the representation in the constituencies, but I've also pointed out that we're never going to get it absolutely evenly balanced. Deputy Tadier was actually pointing that out as a advantage to not accepting the amendment. And so, in an ideal world, I'd believe that the PPC would at this stage, and that it would be doing some serious role defining and some serious cost-benefit analysis that would offer greater refinement in the way that deputies are distributed amongst constituencies. And that is what my original proposition has sought, what the main proposition has sought. But very early on in his opening speech, Deputy Farnham alerted members to the difficulties in this respect. And given that he is a member of the PPC, I guess he has more insight into its workings than many. And I myself have lectured, but has suggested to the Minister for Environment that we need to think about pace seriously. And I need to be aware that the pace for change needs to be put forward in a staged way and in a logical way. And this is the first step. I'm already aware that some members prefer Deputy Farnham's more rough and ready approach as a way of moving matters in the right direction, with the advantage of certainty, while sparing members grief and hassle and the incurrence of potentially more public costs in doing a more detailed analysis in the way that I had originally envisaged. And I bow to the wisdom of those members from what I have learnt so far. So I do intend to support his amendment and encourage other members in the Assembly to do likewise.
I have obviously been fairly lenient in the way that I've applied standing orders up to this point. I think I must, in the interests of discipline within the debate, be somewhat more assertive in terms of relevance, and I will try and achieve the correct balance. Amongst the standing orders that not only have been not applied in the last speech, but generally throughout the Assembly over yesterday have been avoided, is the way that we should refer to other members of the Assembly. There is no such person as Constable Shenton-Stone, there is no such person as Constable Jael. They are respectively the Constable of St Martin or the Constable of St John. And constables should be referred to by their parish and not by their surname. That is expressly within standing orders. I'm not making it up, it's there, so by all means members can go and read it, and that's what should happen in the future.
My apologies for that, sir.
Well, that's accepted, Deputy, but you're far from the only one. It was common usage yesterday, and I thought that now, having heard it again today, it might be a useful point to mention it. Very well. Deputy Ferry.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to say it's a pleasure to follow Deputy Scott, but I'm not sure that I can say that at the moment. I think with the benefit of hindsight, it might have been better if Deputy Scott had accepted Deputy Farnham's amendment, as this would have made for a much smoother debate. But I'll keep my points to the amendment. So it might seem like a long time ago, but a year and a half ago, we were all knocking doors. And I think in my parish, I was one of the candidates that probably knocked the most doors. I didn't keep a tally, but judging by the boxes of leaflets that I gave out by hand, it was certainly in the thousands. And undoubtedly, the question of senators came up time and time again. And my response to people who raised it was, what's the solution? How do we bring senators back? And some weren't quite sure of that answer. They were quite happy just to say that's for the Assembly to decide. But the people that had thought about it had exactly the same solution that Deputy Farnham is proposing, of 9 senators, 1 from each constituency. And this seems a very simple solution to a problem that perhaps we are overcomplicating. So I welcome Deputy Farnham's amendment to Deputy Scott's proposition. But when I walk into where I work on a day-to-day basis, sir, I have the privilege of being able to have an office space at CLS, which was the Social Security building. And at the end of that corridor, there is a picture. I'm in a far-flung part of the building, well away from everybody else. And I don't take that personally, sir. I think it's just the best space for me. But when I walk down to that corridor, there's a picture, there's a black and white picture of a gentleman with a pipe, and rather Victorian looking. Not Churchill. Deputy Gorse will know the picture that I'm alluding to, because in the bottom inset in that picture, there's an OBE. And that picture used to take pride of place in the Social Security boardroom. And now it's in that far-flung corner of the office space where I sit. That picture is of Senator Philip Lefevre. So that was the senator who brought in the Insular Insurance Jersey Law in 1952. And when we think there are protests outside for the big issues of the day, the teachers, the dreadful things that are happening in the Middle East, if you look back to 1952, the place was swamped with marauding farmers and business people thinking their way of life was going to be devastated purely because we were bringing in, or the senator was going to bring in, social insurance, the Insular Insurance Jersey Law. It's the biggest piece of social legislation to probably ever affect that island. And that was brought in by a senator. So when I look at the senator's picture in the morning, I quite often think, I wonder what he would think the answer would be to how many senators we should have in this assembly. Because in my mind, it's not whether or not senators should come back. The question is, how many senators is the right amount? And I do agree that Deputy Farnham's proposition is the right amount. But this isn't about being retrospective, sir. This is not looking back on a golden age. Because when I look around me in the Assembly now, and I work with ministers who are on portfolios, very busy portfolios, and I know lots of other people are busy as well, lots of other connotables are busy, deputies are busy with their constituents. But when I look at particular ministers who cut across 2 busy portfolios, and they have 3 parishes to also try to get to parish meetings. Because I'm sure, as my connotab will attest to, I attend every parish meeting that I possibly can. And when I speak to ministers and I say, do you go to every parish meeting that in your constituency, which is made up of 3 parishes? 3? And the answer is yes. Now, I think that's an unintended consequence to where we've got to with the way that we're constituted. I think bringing senators back would bring that dimension back that is sorely missing, and people are stretched, and I don't think that is what we intended when we changed the way the states is made up. The good thing about the last changes is there are no uncontested deputy seats. Voter equality is undoubtedly better than it was, but if we're honest, the biggest single thing with voter equality is the island mandate, because every voter gets a chance to vote for the person that they want to see in this assembly. And lastly, sir, when I look at Guernsey have just gone from a parish system to an island-wide system. And now there's a desperate need to bring their deputies back into the parishes. And they are struggling with what is the correct number? What is the right number of island-wide mandate to parish mandate people or members? And it's clear that we had a really good system with deputies looking after people in their parish, the connétables looking after the parishes, and senators looking after the island as a whole. And some people say, well, maybe senators used to shrug off constituency work. Actually, the whole island was senators' constituency work, and any islander could go to those central figures. And lastly, sir, when I look at the position of the Chief Minister, as well as busy ministers, the Chief Minister coming from the ranks of the senatorial benches was the right solution for Jersey. So yes, I will be supporting this proposition, and I urge other members to do the same, sir. Thank you.
Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. Many of the speeches have just been about the main proposition, and certainly Deputy Farnham's speech was almost entirely about the main proposition, which is ironic because he said in his speech that in the past members have taken a number of constitutional questions without due consideration. In his speech, he said almost nothing about his amendment. The amendment says 9 senators. That is the thing which he needs to justify in this amendment. I still haven't heard a justification for 9 senators. Why 9? Well, it does seem, as far as I can tell from the speeches that have been made, that the big reason for 9 senators is administrative convenience. It's the simplest thing to do. Knock one off the districts and put them into an island-wide election. So it can be achieved easily and quickly. Or, as Deputy Tadia said, perhaps it's just because we've never tried 9 before. Expediency, not principle. No consideration of the mechanics of having 9 senators, with the potential for 20 or 30 candidates. How will this work in hustings? It might, but we've not seen any analysis of that. Maybe we would do away with hustings and do something different. Again, there's been no consideration of that. Might we not want to consider other options? And at least the original proposition kept that option open. There's no analysis of apportionment. A few people here will know what that means, but having sat on the Electoral Commission...
Would the Deputy give way for a point of clarification?
A point of clarification of your speech or of the deputies, what the deputies just said? Because you will, of course, have a chance to respond. So you'd like clarification of what the deputies just said?
Yes. So
Would you give way, Deputy? It's entirely
Yes, I
matter
will
for you
give
whether
way.
you do. Yes.
I let a couple of things the Deputy said go, sir. He alluded to the fact that my speech didn't address the amendment. So I want to ask if he could clarify whether he actually listened to what I said and has he read my amendment? Because what he's saying is completely incorrect.
Well, I'm not sure that is a point of clarification because...
But I'm happy to respond to it.
Yes, well, there we are.
I didn't say that he didn't mention it. I said he made virtually no mention of it. And if you look back at the speech...
No,
you'll find,
I'm sorry.
I'm not giving away any further. If you go back to that speech, you will find that I am absolutely correct. And if you look at the original, the report that accompanies the amendment as well, I think it's 3/4 of the way down, it mentions the figure of 9. But you will have a chance to make your points.
Through the chair, please.
The deputy will have a chance to make his points, summing up. So there's no analysis of apportionment, which is the way we have of judging whether the correct representation is achieved for people in different areas. Is there excuse me, sir. Is there a bias within the system towards, say, urban areas, rural areas, or towards particular constituencies? That analysis has not been mentioned. There's been no detail on that, not even a mention. My view is that if we are going to go back to an island-wide mandate, then it is right and proper that it should be properly considered with many different options under consideration, because the issues are weighty. The issues are significant. And we have never reformed our electoral system in the past on the basis of such flimsy arguments as are being put forward here, virtually absent arguments. These have been issues that have been referred to commissions or to Clothier or to, in the case of the last set, at the very least, PPC going around the parishes, talking to people, making sure that there was proper feedback. These are big, serious issues. They should not be decided just on the basis of a simple piece of administrative convenience that allows one person to be lopped off each constituency. So my contention is that we should reject this amendment because this is a serious matter that requires much more consideration than has been given so far. There's been no detailed evidence to suggest why 9 people would be the best. And in fact, the complete absence of that detail, when you compare it to previous attempts to reform our electoral system, the amount of research that was done, the amount of consideration given to the various different issues of how you would effectively organise the election, what effect it would have on voting weights, and so on. That work is entirely absent. And I think it should be, if we're going to go down this route, therefore, I would say reject this amendment. You can reject this amendment and we could still end up with this solution. But let's at least do it with proper consideration of all the issues. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Luce.
Thank you, sir. So in debates like this, we get lots of quotes about statistics, and I just looked up some famous quotes about statistics, and of course the most famous one is, "There are lies, damn lies, and statistics." There's another one that goes, "If your experiment needs statistics, you ought to have done a better experiment." And the last one I would say to members is this: "It's a mark of a truly intelligent person to be moved by statistics." And that may be right, but of course there are always lots of statistics. And yesterday when Deputy Tadier spoke, he quite rightly highlighted the fact that in St Saviour's there are 6 representatives and a large number of constituents, and that the area of St John and Trinity and St Lawrence were better off because they had more representatives. But of course what the deputy forgot to say to us was that when it comes to voter, the value of your vote, that of course in the 3 parish constituency, voters only get to vote for a smaller number of deputies and 1 constable. So actually the voters in that area only get to vote for 5. And when you look at the numbers, the value of the votes in those 2 areas, those 2 constituencies, St Saviour's and St John, St Lawrence and Trinity, they are almost identical. So be aware, members, that statistics can be used in very many different ways. And those 2 constituencies are almost identical. In fact, if you adopt Senator Farnham's amendment and remove 1 deputy, the voter in St Saviour is better off than the voter in the area of Trinity and St John's and St Lawrence. So we need to be careful. We need to be careful the way we use statistics, and we need to remember that. I'm going to support this amendment, sir. It's been described as rough and ready, but it is simple and straightforward. It returns us to a number of senators that we enjoyed previously. And then when it comes to the main debate, I will explain further why I will be supporting it. But for now, I would just say to members, removing one deputy from each of the electoral constituencies does not always give you the effect that you might be led to believe. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Alves.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to talk solely to this amendment and what Deputy Farnham has said, and I will keep this short because I don't want to repeat points and I don't want to cover points that will probably and should be made in the main debate. Deputy Farnham, in his speech, stated that the original proposals without this amendment would, and I quote, require significant other work to be undertaken by PPC, which would be challenging to complete amongst lack of consensus within members of PPC. Sir, in the last term, a separate subcommittee was set up specifically looking at reforms and different proposals. That was called the Election Observers Committee. Yes, it was made up of 3 PPC members at the time, of which I was one of them, but this doesn't have to be the case. We have other PPC subcommittees that have only one member of the main PPC committee, for example. So even back then, we didn't always have consensus when proposals were brought back to the main PPC, but all members did agree to allow proposals to be lodged so that things could be debated. In fact, sir, I remember bringing something forward myself as PPC chair, which I did not agree with, but I did agree needed debating. And I remember voting against things. In fact, I remember this distinctly because a fellow PPC member, the then Deputy Guida, decided to out me on Facebook about one particular proposal. And I defended my decision by saying that I agreed to lodge it because it was important that this assembly debated those proposals. And I think it's important that members of PPC recognise that they may not always agree with proposals being brought forward, but if members really want to ensure the democratic process of debate and voting is followed, they should agree to allow things to go to debate irrespective of their own personal beliefs. This is what debate in this chamber and the vote is for. Let's face it, if anyone knows how challenging it is to come up with proposals that will get a consensus, it is me. I drafted 4 different proposals during the first 2 years of the last term, while being on one of the busiest scrutiny panels, the health panel, amongst various other subcommittees. And we still managed to hold discussions and consultations with members to ensure that everybody's views was gathered that could inform a proposal that would gain support in this assembly. If I could do it along with 2 others, I am sure PPC are more than capable of looking at this again. We did it last term, we were successful in getting something passed, and we were in the midst of a pandemic. So I strongly disagree with Deputy Farnham's comments that PPC will find it challenging to do the work required of the original proposition without this amendment. In fact, sir, I will volunteer again to be on a subcommittee that revisits this, whatever the outcome of this debate. Now, I understand why Deputy Farnham has brought this forward, as on the face of it, and as many have mentioned, it does seem the more fair and democratic way of doing this. But things are not always as they seem, and I think Deputy Tadia did a good job of highlighting this issue with his comments about the overall representation of each constituency. I won't repeat what was said yesterday, and I won't get into the mathematics behind it as much as I would love to. But I will remind members of one particular decision that the last Assembly made. In the first set of proposals which made it to debate around electoral reform with the last PPC, this Assembly voted for Part A of P126-2019. That's P126-2019, if anyone wants to look up that vote. And they voted in favour of, and I quote, to agree that fair representation and equality in voting weight and power across the whole population should be the basis of any reform of the composition and election of the states. This amendment, currently being proposed, would not make the current voting weight and power better. And I would like to think that this current Assembly would still agree with this decision. And like the Constable of St John said, let's not go backwards. But by accepting this amendment, there is no doubt that PPC will not be able to explore any other option. So if members really believe and want to encourage democracy, then I would urge members to vote against this amendment. If nothing else, than to allow PPC to have the freedom to explore different options if the original proposal is adopted. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Dublé.
Thank you, sir. I'm just looking over my speech because I don't want to repeat the excellent speech of Deputy Alves there. I just wanted to respond to something a previous member mentioned about the proposal of the main amendment and it being ideal that she may have accepted the amendment to the proposition. And I wanted to defend her right not to do that, because I think one of the core principles that we operate by is that we have the freedom to change our mind. And I think that is a good thing if we can retain that ability to listen to each other and to change our mind during the course of a debate. It might be a bit less convenient, but I applaud the member for actually taking the opportunity to listen and changing her mind, even if it's not something that I might agree with. And I would encourage other members to come into this assembly, into the chamber with that open mind and ready to be persuaded by each other. So on the amendment, I'm not minded to disclose whether I'm in favour of the main proposition at this time, but as Deputy Alves has mentioned and previous speakers, the single point we need to focus on is, does this amendment improve the main proposition or not? So if a member is in favour of restoring senators, they might consider that it does make the main amendment a bit less bad, and be tempted to vote for it to soften the effect of the main proposition. Or, on the other hand, sir, a member might be in favour of restoring senators and think that looking over Senator Farnham's report, that this number of 9 seems quite manageable, seems reasonable. There are some tables at the end of the report with some data and some evidence there, so why not go for it? And actually, I do applaud Deputy Farnham for his commitment to this issue, because he is fairly relentless with this and obviously believes in it passionately. But sir, as Deputy Alves has referred to PPC, Senator Farnham is not a body of elected members. You know, I have a lot of respect for Senator Farnham, and I know that he does do his homework. Sorry, there's a slip there, Deputy Farnham. But this chamber, as a body, has elected a representative body in PPC. We don't just elect the chair of PPC, we elect all of the members, and those members are there to make these considerations for us, and then PPC to bring to the chamber, and to do all of that work and all of that background information collecting, of which there has been absolutely a massive amount. I mean, I understand quite well, I think, from conversations with Deputy Alves, how much work went into previous debates that we had, and how long it took to get to a point where we had something that was acceptable to the Assembly. So it is just not acceptable to me, sir, that we should vote for something that has been brought forward by one member. So whether members are for or against the principle of restoring senators, this amendment does not improve the main proposition, and members should vote against it.
Thank you, Deputy. Conor St Helier.
Thank you, sir. I noted that earlier in the debate you reminded members they need to refer to the constables in their proper title, and it does occur to me, I hope I may be able to say this, that there are quite a few breaches of standing orders going on at the moment, and I would urge PPC to perhaps do some training so that members, for example, when they're being addressed by the chair, know they have to sit down, and numerous other things that seem to be going by the board, which I'm sure you'll be dealing with, sir, in due course. To address the single issue of the amendment and the number 9, some members seem to me to be making rather heavy weather of it. We did have a period where we had 8 senators, and that was perfectly manageable. I certainly chaired hustings involving hopefuls for that situation. Of course, in those days we had a separate election day, and that's not something that's been mentioned yet, but I would certainly hope that if this proposition goes through, either amended or not, that PPC look at the possibility of having a separate election day for senators. I don't see, I must say, since we had the single election day, which was going to be the kind of the silver bullet to get people to vote, I don't think it really achieved that. And one could argue that the separate election day for senators was a very good way of gingering up the voting public to get them ready to vote in the subsequent elections. France, of course, have elections on 2 successive Sundays. It also, of course, had the advantage that unsuccessful candidates for the senatorial vote would then be very familiar with the procedure when they ran either for deputy or constable. And I think that is all good. So I would hope that PPC would take that thought away if the result of this debate is to support the reintroduction of senators. It, after all, doesn't really matter whether we support the amendment or not, so long as those who support the reintroduction of senators make good arguments in the main debate. And I'm looking forward to the main debate because certainly my position has shifted over the years. And so I would simply say, the other thing I wanted to say about Senator Farnham's amendment is I think it is, some members have described it as in rather unflattering terms. I think it's elegant because what he is simply offering is a way of simply slicing off each of the electoral districts a single seat and putting those seats towards the senatorial position. That surely cannot influence the voter equity of the system we currently operate under, because you're taking a seat away from each of the districts. As I say, I don't see a problem with number 9, and I will support the amendment, but I do not see this as a vote of confidence or not in PPC. I think the deputy is trying to be helpful. He's also aware of the ticking clock, which always is a problem when we come to try to change our electoral system. There isn't long to get it done. And I think the deputy is offering a way of saving time and that's worthy of our support. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Conrad. Deputy Messick.
Thank you, sir. There's a very simple reason for voting against this amendment, and I hope to help the Constable of St Helier on this, because the line in it which says the removal of one deputy from each district would have virtually no impact on the greater voter equality when compared to our current electoral system is mathematically untrue. And the comments by the Constable of St Helier just now about the simplicity of this, he needs to get a calculator out and have a look, because this amendment actually is bad for the Constable's own constituents. So I've taken part in lots of electoral reform debates with Deputy Farnham, and Deputy Farnham's greatest virtue in those debates is his consistency, but his greatest vice in those debates has also been his consistency, in that he's consistently got the numbers wrong every single time, as he does in the appendices to the report for this amendment, where he does the population by district per deputy and presents that firstly in two separate tables. Why aren't they in the same table so you can have a more direct comparison? Where's the percentages in them? The percentage of deviation is not difficult to work out, and it's the percentage of deviation that marks whether we're compliant with the Venice Commission or not. Answer, those are tables that only refer to the deputies and not the constables who provide parish representation, which provides, when it comes to voter equity, a skewing effect, which the distribution of deputies must be designed to counteract, so every voter on the island has an equal say in the makeup of this assembly. If you, in a unicameral chamber, consider each category of member totally separately, you get a skewed chamber that isn't representative of the population. And that's why the numbers that are presented in his report are completely flawed. And he's taken part in, I'm sorry to say, enough debates on electoral reform to know that his presentation of those numbers is completely misleading and leads to being able to get away with making a statement like the removal of one deputy from each district would have virtually no impact on the greater voter equality, when that is mathematically untrue. It does have an impact on it, and PPC in previous years has engaged the work of academics who have produced multiple reports for this assembly outlining what different options look like when it comes to voter equity, to show district by district how you get as close as possible to being even, how you distribute the deputy seats as far as is possible to make sure you get that voter equality. And the Deputy's amendment doesn't seek to do that and seeks to tie the hands of PPC. So even if PPC know that there's a better option for that distribution to get greater equality, they're banned from bringing it to this assembly. And that is the fundamental reason, even if you are in support of reintroducing senators, why this amendment should be rejected, so you don't tie PPC's hands behind their backs and you give them the ability to sit down and crunch the numbers and do that consultation or analysis as appropriate to make sure that whatever iteration of electoral reform comes back to the Assembly is one that, as far as possible, meets that principle of voter equality. And so, when I was listening to Deputy Farnham's speech yesterday and took a couple of notes of some of the things that he said, so I could reference them when I responded, he said, and I made a note of this, he said there have been a number of constitutional decisions made in the past without due consideration or consultation. And I just couldn't help but think how ironic that is when he's presenting a clear and defined option for electoral reform for Jersey, with himself having done no consideration of the numbers in an adequate sense, and no consultation, not approaching the different groups there are in the Assembly on the basis of political persuasion, and there are, sometimes very bizarre coalitions that get formed on an issue-by-issue basis in this Assembly, not approached any of us to say, does this look okay? And the word he also used occasionally in his speech was the word compromise. And I asked, just who exactly is he asking us to compromise with, and compromise on what basis? So that there are some in the Assembly who think we should have one type of states member elected in equal-sized constituencies, and there are some who think we should have 3 types of states member elected in unequal constituencies, and we're going to compromise by having 3 types of states member elected in unequal constituencies. Some compromise, that sounds like. So the system that we have now is one that was built on compromise. It was built by bringing those different groups together who had very, very different ideas of what a perfect electoral system would look like, sat them down and said, right, is there some middle ground we can find here? And amazingly, that previous PPC managed to do that. It managed to get people like me, who want one type of member in equal-sized constituencies, to enthusiastically vote for something that wasn't one type of member in equal-sized constituencies, but it was a step forward. It was something that was substantially better than what we had before, and a system which, despite what Deputy Farnham said in his speech, is a system which has been overwhelmingly rejected by the public of Jersey when a referendum was held on that subject. So he described his campaign to keep the current system, what was then the current system in that referendum, as change, but not this change. And then we see this amendment, and it turns out the change was that change all along. So there are a great number of inconsistencies, both in the arguments that are being advanced by Deputy Farnham in support of this amendment, but most importantly, and what I seriously hope this Assembly will regard as the clincher here, the real important point, which is that the mathematical analysis that he's done on the impact of voter equality in the appendices to his report is flawed and inaccurate. And if we support this amendment, we deprive PPC of the opportunity of doing a proper, considered analysis with whatever expert advice they need to do so, to ensure that whatever that next stage of electoral reform is, it is done on the basis of voter equality, where everyone on the island can know that when they go to the polling station, the say that they have in the makeup of this Assembly is equal to anyone else in the island, and his amendment is badly thought out and prevents PPC from doing that, and so I'd urge members to reject it on that basis.
Thank you, Deputy. The Connoisseur of St Martin.
Thank you, sir. To address Deputy Farnham's assertion that 9 senators, 1 from each district, is perfect, can I please ask whether we were going to be prescriptive and pluck 1 candidate to be senator out of each district? How do we ensure that 1 candidate from each district becomes a senator? Do we find that 1 district has been successful in having 3 candidates being voted in as senators? And if that's the case, do we then tell a deputy from an eastern district, or vice versa, to go and represent constituents in the west, because all their candidates are senators? This might sound elegant, but no consideration at all of how this will work has been considered, and no consideration, I think, has been given to whether this amendment is equitable, achievable or fair. Thank you.
Deputy Lally.
Thank you, sir. I know we've been here before. We've been here many, many times before. And over the course of the past 20 years, I have lost count how many times we have been debating the subject, looking at ourselves and our own constitution. However, during the last election, it was a real issue on the doorsteps. And I've always supported the island-wide mandate. I myself have brought 2 propositions to this Assembly to try and get it reinstated when the PPC of the day decided amongst themselves to lob off 4 senatorial seats. There was no consultation in that, and we went forward with the next election with 8 island-wide mandate seats. During the last election, and in our forever quest to strive for something, voter equality, to instigate elections where there was voter apathy, possibly, or to strive for one election day, we have, my electorate have lost 6 votes, sir. Before the last election, we were able to vote for 8 senators, 1 constable and 1 deputy. That's 10. After the last election, we were able, in each parish, were able to vote for 1 constable and 3 deputies. That's 4. So there was a feeling that we had lost out and the number in this Assembly hadn't reduced any. So we have, I feel, lost our way in sort of thinking about what we are actually trying to achieve here. But we've also lost our way in the different types, in recognising the different types and what it means to be either a constable, a deputy, or have an island-wide mandate. For example, the island-wide mandate, historically, the senators would be the ministers, or at the time, presidents of a committee. So from that pool of people, the chief minister would look to people with an island-wide mandate first and foremost. It wasn't always the case, but they were the ones that made up the majority of the Council of Ministers. And I think that's right. I think it's right if you are elected with sort of 6, 8, 10,000 votes, you should be making those kind of island-wide decisions. Whereas the deputies dealt with their constituents, the deputies are political, as opposed to the constables who are not. Now, the constables represent their parish, but how do they represent their parish? How do they know what their constituents are feeling about given issues? And this is where I feel that we've lost something. And certainly parish assemblies, unless they're like the ones that we're going to have in our parish this evening, they're not terribly populated, shall we say. There isn't an awful lot of interest for people to give up their seat in front of the television and trot along on a wet November evening to their parish hall. The last week's parish assembly, for example, we were there 10 minutes. So how do we reinvigorate the parish assemblies? Well, it's in the constable's gift to be able to do this. hence the lodging periods of our propositions.
Deputy, I do hesitate to interrupt you, but you appear to be talking about what should happen at parish assemblies, and I can't immediately see it relates to whether we should adopt Deputy Farnham's amendment or not. If you're able to link the two straight away, then I'd be grateful. Otherwise, could we return to the topic, please?
Well, I'm trying, sir. I'm trying to demonstrate that when we are in this assembly, we come into the assembly from different aspects. One is the island-wide mandate, one is the deputy, and one is the constables. And the constables, I feel, should be putting more things to their parishioners so that when they come to this assembly, they can then vote accordingly. For example, this particular proposition, how do the parishioners feel? Some of us know, if we canvassed, we'll know how some of the parishioners feel about this proposition. But
I'm sorry, Deputy, I do hesitate to interrupt members, as members will know, but I simply cannot make the intellectual journey from what should happen at parish assemblies to whether or not there should be 9 senators and one of the deputies removed, as Deputy Farnham's amendment is primarily about. And if you could make that link, I would be grateful if you would. Otherwise, we do have to move on to directly on the question of whether the amendment improves or doesn't improve the main proposition.
okay, I'll leave it there then, sir. I was just trying to demonstrate that we have different roles to play, or we come to this assembly from a different mandate. So I have, as I've said, always been a supporter of the island-wide mandate. I'm sorry that Deputy Farnham's proposition does, to me, seem a bit rough and ready, and I would have far preferred to vote for Deputy Scott's, where more time and consideration could be given. For example, the why 9? Why not 12 and go back to the 6 and 6 to provide some continuity? So I would like this really to be explored more by PPC. I support, as I've said, I support the island-wide mandate, but I would like a little more work. But I would like you, sir, to explain if we are voting for. Do we now need to vote on Deputy Farnham's? Now it's been accepted. I'm not entirely sure how it's
Allow me to
going to work
assist you.
from now.
Thank you. I mean, no. Had it been accepted at the beginning of the debate, then it would have been read as amended. If it had been read as amended, then that would have been the entire parameters of the debate. Unfortunately, or fortunately, as the case may be, it wasn't accepted, therefore it's a separate amendment. So there will be a vote on Deputy Farnham's amendment, and then the main debate will continue, either on the proposition as amended or as not, depending upon the vote on the amendment.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Deputy Gardner. Yes. Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. Actually, I put my light on halfway through Deputy Labe's speech, and when the speech is over, was something that I agreed. So one thing that I agreed, if we have 12 ministers, and we're thinking about senators, we might need to have 12 senators. It might make more sense. Personally, I don't believe we need to have senators, but first of all, 9, it's a very strange number. Does it work for anything that we have in place as a framework? No. People raise that the people who are elected as senators, they're expected to play roles. If we are looking at the last senatorial elections, the top poller, Senator Moore, was she around the Council of Ministers? Did she make any decision around the Council of Ministers? No. Senator Valois, She was, and she needed really to tell. The second topo, she wasn't there. So what's the? Yeah, she was. Sorry, Tracy. Apology. The Senator Valois was the top, and Senator Moore was the second. I'm a bit emotional because I feel that when we are talking about the top pollers, senatorial, island-wide, didn't manage to get and to really influence the government, it's getting me to the third point. What's the real difference apart from the name and the way that people were elected? None. Because in day-to-day work, we are all doing the same work in the Assembly. So I urge, first of all, vote against the amendment, because 9 doesn't make sense. And if somebody considers about the senators, it's for the main debate.
Constable St Mary.
Thank you, sir. I'm afraid to say I rather fear we're going down the same line as we have in many previous debates of getting into detail, which is not the subject of this amendment. Like the Deputy of Sir Martin Griville, I follow her standpoint. I am in favour of retention of senators. I think that I understand that what Deputy Farn has suggested is one, quote, solution, but it is but one. And I think if we are going to go down this route and revisit it, we should give PPC the freedom of choice to come up with other ideas, voting on different days or whatever. But we shouldn't be prescriptive and tie ourselves to the one proposition made by Deputy Farnham, however meritorious it might be. And if I'm allowed to just stray, sir, for the moment, reference has been made to relevant constables. It may be of interest to the members as a whole that the Law Commission have produced a paper on future running of assemblies. That will be, the Comité des Comptes is due to receive presentation sometime, and hopefully that might well be the germ of further ideas. Thanks, sir.
Well, can I tell? Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Well, if whoever it is would like to come in, but in the meanwhile, Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Talking about the amendment, so the amendment, it's been mentioned that amendments need to improve the original proposition, and I must touch on the fact that I think the original proposition does have a large amount of confusion involved with it, but we'll talk about that later. This amendment purports to improve that. It does not. It ties the hands, and I think this is really important, sir. We have, in the last few days, looked at pieces of legislation that have gone through so much consultation, so complex, and said, actually, we want to come back with more information because it's not detailed enough. But at the same time today, sir, we are looking at an amendment that ties the hands of PPC, the body that we have set up to decide the way in which we function, represented across the Assembly, sir. This amendment ties it. It comes up with a number of 9 or 8, I'm not entirely sure. Not entirely sure what they will do. The data is flawed. Let's think about this. Think about this and any other proposition that came to this amendment, this Assembly, sir, if these were the points that came with it. It ties the hands of a group in order to tell them to do when they've got that we have employed to make those decisions. It comes with flawed data, and it also assumes that but doesn't define a difference in the role of a senator, sir. Now, when we walk through this door into this chamber, we have one unique beauty to our democracy, and that is that everyone's vote is equal, and that anyone can bring something to this Assembly, regardless of where you were elected, or whether you're a constable or a deputy. And we have to be very careful that we don't damage that by giving a hierarchy, if you like, in this Assembly of opportunity to represent. Now, at the moment, what we have is a much more equal representation in numbers for members of our community. And that, sir, without senators, has meant that we have a more productive, I think, approach to what we're doing. But we're in the early stages, and we'll talk about that later. To impose 9 senators now without a definition of what they do, how they will fit into the structure that we have, how they will fit into the governance of this island. And I really implore people to think about governance, because some of the arguments that have been made so far have not thought about the equity of governance and what that means. This notion that this is the biggest issue on the doorstep. So when we knocked on doors, the big issues on the doorstep were not simply senators. They were about all the other things that we as a body have to vote on and decide upon. So, and senators, and this is the problem I have with this amendment, defining how many senators before we even start without any definition of what they do. Senators are not the only ones who will look at island-wide issues. And so by saying with this amendment, we will therefore have 8, and in some way, and I cannot picture in my mind how this is going to work, they will be the ones who look at the island-wide issues. So everything I do is effectively island-wide. When a constituent comes yesterday, so I asked a question that came directly from a constituent in my drop-in, which, and I'll talk about this in a main, which was an island-wide issue of the issue of violence against women and girls. Direct representation, democratic representation on an equal size vote in terms of the equal size of the individuals who vote in this assembly. It's worth the same, which brought back a direct in this assembly. So by introducing 9
You're
senators...
being asked I'm sorry, Deputy Scott, do you
so
put
could
your
I
light on?
could I answer the clarification at the end?
Well, it depends if it's a point of order. Did you have a
Point of order, sir, just to ask if perhaps the deputy's straying off the topic of the advantage of the amendment.
Well, I didn't detect that he was, Deputy, so please carry on.
So I was using the convention of letting you decide on that. And it does throw you when that happens.
It does.
So if I may just ask for a moment to think about where I was, because it's gone.
And in the meanwhile, I'll say that a point of order requires a ruling from the chair. Generally, the chair will have to make a decision as to whether or not things are on point, and a fair amount of leeway must be given, and that's the leeway that I have been giving up to now. But it's not for members to police unless in extreme circumstances whether the debate is relevant, and just to assist members who may not know, which is in Standing Orders, in Standing Order 1041, a speech by a member of the States must be relevant to the business being discussed. And that's the standing order that should be applied. Now, I hope you had enough time to regroup, Deputy Ward.
Yes, thank you, sir. The other issue I may raise, sir, is standing up and down all the time is not good for my knees. And I think, sir, I may be just bold to say that may be true for some other members in this assembly, but I don't know. I was not looking at you, Minister. So I think one of the issues we have is the biggest issue. I'm going to have to repeat, and I apologise if I do, but I really had lost my track. We cannot agree pieces of significant change to the way that we run our democracy with data that is flawed, without allowing the body that we've set up to look at this in detail, to look at it in detail, and on hearsay, and that's the wrong word, on anecdote, because that's what we've had in this debate. And I just urge members to reject this amendment. If you want to vote for the main one, but let's have a proper debate on that, and let's think really carefully about the implications of what we're saying there. It's difficult not to strain that, but we'll do that at the time. So I'll end there and just urge members to think really carefully about what you're doing here and the possible implications of this amendment, because it is not what some people have said in this assembly, sir. Thank you.
Deputy Jean.
Thank you, sir. I have had, I think, the pleasure with the fact that I newly arrived in Jersey only a few years ago, and so I've never actually had to vote in any other elections than the one that I was actually a deputy in. So I've not had past experience in either in feeling that I've lost votes, in understanding that what a senator is for, what's the difference, etc. So I'm coming at this, I hope, with completely fresh eyes. And specifically to this amendment, I'm not quite sure on understanding why 9 senators, because if we're talking about creating a hierarchy, so a senator feels that they are higher within the democratic chamber because they have an island-wide vote. There's 9. And as I'm hearing from other members, there is an expectation of some or all of those senators to become part of the Council of Ministers. But there are at least 12 ministers. So how does that work when the Council of Ministers, that is a very difficult, and we know that from late, to have cohesion and compromise at the Council of Ministers table when you are creating hierarchy as well within this kind of voting pattern that we are discussing, when you have 9 senators who may or may not go into sitting around the table, and therefore you will then have others who sit around the table who are in a different hierarchical category. And that is how I'm feeling in this debate. It feels that because a senator has an island-wide mandate, they somehow have more legitimacy than another like a deputy or a Conotab, which then how does that work and how will that play out at the Council of Ministers table when it's already difficult enough as it is? Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Farnham to respond.
Thank you, sir. I can just have I think the debate we've just had, first of all, can I thank all members who have spoken. I know we have broadly and widely differing views on this, but I think the disparate sort of nature of some of the comments, some of the views, so just demonstrate exactly how hard it is for us to agree on this. And I just want to correct a couple of things. Yes, I am a member of the PPC, and when I alluded to the PPC in my speech, I actually said the main proposition brought by Deputy Scott was bringing greater flexibility would, if approved, require significant work to be undertaken by the Privileges and Procedures Committee, which would be challenging to complete in the absence of any consensus among members, sir. I was talking about members of this Assembly, because it is the members of this Assembly that will decide ultimately what happens. So I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. This Assembly, I think, is divided. The PPC, I think, is divided. The previous PPC was divided. I think just about every committee or subcommittee or panel that's tried to solve this problem has always been divided. So I do apologise if that wasn't clear. And I brought this amendment, sir, because a number of members, when discussing the issue, had said to me that they would prefer to be voting on something with detail than voting on a broad principle, which is going to require significant amount of additional work. And I'm not saying we won't achieve that, but it will be challenging to do that work in the time allotted. But I'm sure we will get to something. But just hearing the comments in this debate, I think will lead members to understand just how challenging it will be to sort of come up with something broadly different. There is no solution. A number of members have said, let's not vote for this. The main amendment is a better solution because it allows greater flexibility, and I alluded that in my speech. And I would be happy if we lost this amendment to support the main proposition. But I suspect, sir, some members are bowling us a bit of a googly here by saying let's avoid this. It's too much. It's too detailed, and we're tying the hand of the PPC, and they have no intention of voting for the main proposition. A number of members spoke, sir, and whichever way we look at it, less people are voting right now, and less people are engaging. People are becoming disinterested. I've never known anything like it. If members and the public thought the last states were bad, I think, sir, I'm finding it. Even my family don't want to talk about politics to me anymore because they've had enough. Not of me, sir, but of politics in general. And so we are losing it. Now, I can't remember a time when politicians were ever popular. I remember my parents being critical, my grandparents being critical, but also always being proud of our unique system of government and independence. I'm going to just address quickly a few points that some members made, and I'll talk about some figures as well. But Deputy Tadier, whilst I understand what he was saying, because I do have a spreadsheet with all of the figures on, and perhaps I should have put that into the to the report. But the Constable of St John does not represent the parishioners of St Lawrence, and so that is it's not correct. But Deputy Luce addressed that, and I would say, while I remember, so I meant to say this at the beginning, in relation to senators. So we refer to senators because the Constable John said we didn't want to go back, but it's not going back. And I wonder if the title of senator just evokes some sort of some memories of, as Deputy Chern referred to, of days gone by where some members were superior to others. I mean, what's in a title? We could all be deputies. We could have district deputies. We could have island-wide deputies. And I think it's obviously worrying some that they feel that the title of senator reflects some sort of superiority. Of course it doesn't, whatsoever. Number of members spoke about, Deputy Fair, a number of members spoke about the strength of feeling on the doorstep at the last elections. We cannot avoid that. Deputy Alves, who's done a huge amount of work trying to find consensus, and I enjoy working with deputies. I do with the deputies, I do with all of my colleagues generally speaking, sir. But spoke about members' voting weight and power, and I still maintain that when we're talking about members' voting weight, we still haven't got it right. We're a long way with what we have here, and as long as we have constables in the Assembly, there's always going to be that issue. And I am a supporter. I think we need to retain the constables because, as I said previously, we have three types of member in this Assembly for a reason: to provide balance, constables representing the parish and the local government aspect of the work we do here, and then of course the constituencies, which are a bit more focused on constituency interests in the island-wide mandate, who can operate without fear of favour or without being pressured from constituency or parish interest. That's what it's about. There's no other reason for it. It's about providing balance in this Assembly, but some members are just trying to deflect from that, sir. Deputy Mezek spoke about, and a number of other members spoke about figures. Well, I did put some figures in sir. Sorry, it's a problem when you have so many papers. In the report, sir, and those figures were based on the census population figures. They are correct. I think similar figures to Deputy Gorst used previously. They probably won't be correct by the time we get to the next elections in 2026 because the population has fallen, as we understand. But they were correct, and for members such as Deputy Rennie and Deputy would say they weren't correct, I have to object to, sir. And the figures are quite clear. Try to keep them as simple as possible, because if you get too tied up in statistics, you'll disappear and not come out for some time. And we can do statistics until the cows come home, sir, but we'll never agree. And in relation to the Venice Convention, and I believe we are a special case because the Venice Convention specifically refers in parts to different types of jurisdictions, jurisdictions with different logistical challenges, either in very large geographical areas or very small geographical areas. And actually the figures we're talking about, which are in tables in my report, set out the population differences. If you want to put that into percentage figures, sir, for deputies in the current format, sir, the variance goes from minus 13% to plus 10%, and in the amended one it goes to minus 14 to plus 24. But in terms of actual numbers, that's very small. And also, sir, I have some more figures here that members might find interesting because it relates to the comment, I suppose, about the power and weight of voters, and I think some members have talked about the importance of voter equity. And I remember many members who supported the position we're in now with the process, saying that, you know, it would be great to have the Assembly elected where we all have similar weight. We've all been elected with roughly the same amount of votes or similar amounts of votes. But I'm not sure if members realise that the number of votes in this Assembly for members ranges from 400 to 3,100. In relation to the deputies, we've had a deputy elected with 616 votes and a deputy elected with 2,730 votes. Now, those are far greater variances in the numbers than I'm being criticised for in the percentages and the population figures that were in my table, which were accurate. But we can spend too much time talking about them. But what I'm trying to say, sir, is that really those figures I don't think are overly affected by this amendment. And of course, they are, I think, trumped by the fact that every single voter will get far better representation, because whilst the parish in the districts we give up one vote, we get 8 new votes. And in relation to St Helier, all voters in St Helier will be better off by 8 representatives. They will be better off by 8 representatives. Deputy Labby, Deputy of Grouville, well, sorry, sir, we can't say that now, but Deputy Labby of District, whatever it is, sir.
In the convention, as we now refer to all deputies by their surname.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Deputy Carolyn Labby brought up that particular point, and I think it is a valid point. And I'm not sure, yes, in relation to St Helier, I've served 3 terms prior to this as a senator. And I have served as a deputy in the old system, as a deputy in this system. And the roles are, they're similar, but they are different. And I find they're different in a positive way, because as a senator, I was able to work without fear or favour, or being influenced by parish or constituency pressures or interests, sir. And that's impossible. No member in this assembly can work without, I think we're duty bound to represent our parishes and districts. Now, I know in practice we all deal in our different roles of scrutiny or ministerial roles with island-wide issues. But I've experienced myself, and from a number of other members, that there is a huge increase in parish and district interests that encroach upon some of our work. We miss the island-wide mandate. We miss that ability, sir, of providing that balance to work across and over parish or constituency interests, sir, to work in the best interest of the island. Because not everything that's in the best interest of a parish or a district is in the best interest of the island. And not everything that might be in the best interest of the island is in the interest of a particular parish or particular district. And deputies in St Saviour and St Helier and St Clement especially will know that when it comes to available land for housing. As just one example, sir. And I wanted to reiterate that the reason for this, sir, this amendment again, sir, is to avoid entering a lengthy period of trying to, with a blank sheet of paper, with the principle of retaining the island-wide mandate, of trying to find a consensus figure, a consensus outcome in this assembly, because I think it's going to be extremely difficult, sir. And if this amendment was approved, sir, then there is always scope to discuss and perhaps amend or any legislation that might come forward. I mean, this is a guide, sir. The Privilege and Procedure Committee will put together the relative legislation, and we all know, sir, that can be amended if people want to try to improve it or change the detail on it, sir. Council of Ministers has always been made up of all types of states members. As long as I can remember, there's been Connétable and deputies and senators. And again, I think on that body, that's important because you have a good mix and a good balance. It's not saying that one particular member is superior or inferior to the other. It's just simply not true, sir. And I don't know why some members cannot see or will not see, sir, why we need that balance in this small assembly, given the nature and the structure of the way we govern ourselves, the way we manage our island. As a senator, sir, and I know there's St Helier, of course, a member of this assembly, sir, with the most votes is the Constable of St Helier, with 3,130 votes. Now, if we were to sort of come to the conclusion that senators must be the chief minister because they've got the highest number of votes, then the Constable of St Helier should be the chief minister. He's got the most votes. He's one step closer already. Chief minister's not looking too concerned, sir. You can see. So you know we must put that to one side. I think, sir, I was trying to string things out because I know two potential voters are not in the assembly at the moment, but I'm going to conclude. As I said, sir, the responses demonstrates just how difficult it is. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. The responses and the speeches made by members today. And I respect all of them. I respect the views, the deeply held views of every single member in this assembly. Just because we disagree, it doesn't mean we can't disagree agreeably. We have to, I think, be understanding of our views. We're all trying to do what is best for the island. And this, as some members contend, is not about a step backwards. So this is about moving forward. It's about the future. It's not about the past. It's about improving our democracy, improving the accountability for islanders. Because the office of senator or island-wide deputy, the island-wide mandate is more accountable. It's more inclusive, sir. It improves voter influence and voter representation. The island-wide mandate, sir, unites islanders at election time. How many voters? I've lost count of how many voters said to me, the people I want to vote for are not in my district. It's a bit worrying they said that to me when I was in the district. That's what they said, sir. I still scraped it. They missed having that island-wide unity, sir, the island ability to discuss that. That was missed. This is going forward because it's combining the best of what we had with the best of what we have now. We have our parish constables, we have the districts, and although the variance in percentages might be out a little bit, they're based on the work, the previous good work of people like Deputy Elvis that has been done. We don't need to redo that work. It's done. So we would have 9 senators, 9 districts, sir, which we've never had before, and the 12 parish constables, sir. And I think that is a step forward. It's not a step back. I thank members for their indulgence with the debate on the amendment, sir. And I ask the appeal.
That is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on Deputy Farnham's amendment to Deputy Scott's main proposition. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. And members to vote. If members have the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been defeated. 15 votes for, 30 votes contra, no abstentions.
Move the 15, please, sir.
Those members voting for, it's not in the right order. So Deputies Farnham, Ferry, Gorst, Labby, Luce, Miles, Miller, Morell, the Conotab of St Clement, St Helier, St Juan, St Peter, Trinity, and Deputy Barbara Ward.
Very well. We now continue with the main debate, or the debate on the main proposition. Does any member wish to speak? Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. It's always scary when people are holding back like that, and I don't want there to be left any impression that this is something to just nod through after having had the main debate on the amendment, because that certainly is not the case. Sir, I think I'll start by speaking frankly, which is that I think the particular case that has been made for this proposition, as opposed to any other iteration of proposition on island-wide voting that's come before, has most certainly been the least coherent and logical that I've ever heard. So the proposer referred multiple times in her opening speech for this to inclusivity and about how this was promoting inclusivity. And so that is demonstrably a complete load of nonsense, because it was when we got rid of senators that we delivered the most diverse and inclusive assembly that we've ever had. And why, sir? Because we had more competitive elections for deputies. We had the none of the above for constables, and we had equal coverage across the island, and people knew that their vote was worth something, and they knew that it was worth giving it a go and standing for election, because we got rid of the rotten boroughs, where taking a chance and trying to stand in a one-seat constituency with a strong incumbent was just not worth it. In a multi-seat constituency spread across the island with as a great voter equity as we can manage, it was worth doing so. And so she referred to closing the door, and she referred to immigrants and finance workers, because of course the senatorial benches were beacons of representation for immigrants and finance workers before. And so I'm going to make this point, sir, that the first ever woman to be elected to this assembly was in a multi-seat district in St Helier number 2. The first Portuguese person to ever get elected to this assembly was in a multi-seat, essentially super district, St Helier number 2. The first Romanian person to get elected in the combined St Saviour constituency, the first black person to ever get elected in St Helier South constituency. It is the system we adopted for the last election that has given us the most diverse representative and inclusive assembly that we've ever had. And if you think that dividing this assembly further between different categories of member is going to improve on that, you are dreaming. It won't do that, because what it does for election candidates is it makes us make all sorts of unpleasant considerations about where we stand, how we campaign. When you have an equal system across the board, it's much simpler, and you, as demonstrated at the last election, you attract a wider variety of candidates. So the public, when they go to their polling station and cast their ballot, are taking part in a meaningful election. So another argument was about resource management. So when we walk through those doors to the floor of this chamber, we are all equal. We become members of the States of Jersey. We have the same pay, the same responsibilities, the same ability to hold any office, and we debate items that affect the whole island. There is no need to divide us based on that one moment in history, that one moment of the election results being called, to then enforce division upon us for the 4 years after that, have an us and them. And so I know that because I've been part of it. I sat on those benches when they were allocated to the senatorial benches. I was physically separated from my party colleagues with whom I shared a manifesto. So this idea about balance is complete nonsense. I served as a senator sharing the same political persuasion as people who were deputies. It's your politics that determines where you sway. And that's obvious, sir, because we look at the constables' benches. They're not united on every issue, and on different political issues, whether they're anything or nothing to do with the parishes, they find themselves divided frequently. We find that in our constituencies as well. We don't always agree, even if we have the same constituency. It's your politics that determines that. And the point of an electoral system based on equality and equity is that the result you get is meant to be more representative of the population as a whole. So for your 4-year term, you do that job in line with what the public wants. And it is clear, sir, from past experience that the addition of senators adds nothing to that. So in the last, just after the last election, when this assembly convened to elect the chief minister, the senators were split 4 and 4 over those candidates. So in actual fact, when you went as a voter to vote in the election, it was your vote for deputy that had a much greater impact on who ended up actually becoming chief minister, because it was the deputies that held the balance in that election. So the senatorial election had actually very, very little impact on determining who ended up in that. I hear the person who didn't succeed in that system saying, what a good idea. So I'm pleased to see I've obviously swayed him on this from his previous position. Sir, Deputy Farnham and others have spoken about voter choice. Deputy Labby, I think, referred to this as well, saying, OK, you lose a deputy vote, but you gain all these senatorial votes. Sir, let's talk about the maths here, because the maths doesn't lie here. It's objective. Your voter influence and power has nothing to do with the number of votes you have. It's to do with the constituency size. And I'm going to, maybe I'll regret what I'm about to do, but I'm going to try to give an example to demonstrate this. So if you live in a constituency that has only 100 people living in it, and you have 1 vote, next door to you, you have a constituency with 1,000 people living in it, but they have 5 votes. Whose votes are more powerful in that situation? It's actually the people with the 1 vote, because their 1 vote is worth 1% of the total result. In the constituency of 1,000 people, even though you have 5 votes, it's still worth 0.5% of the total vote, because everybody else gets more votes as well. That's how you determine the power of your vote. It's not the number of votes you have, it's the size of your constituency. And so, sir, when you turn up to a polling station to vote for senator, your vote when you cast it is worth substantially less than the votes you're casting for deputy, because you're in a smaller constituency and your vote is more likely to be the casting vote. It's a greater percentage of the final vote than senators. So I actually want to look at the order paper for this state sitting, sir. Let's look at what we've got, excluding, of course, the current proposition. We've just had a very lively debate on the renter dwellings regulations. We've got, after this, we've got the draft financial services regulations, draft limited partnership regulations, draft Children Conventions Rights Commencement Act, one I'm particularly looking forward to, the building and conservation areas regulations, Christmas bonus, minimum residential space standards, and that I believe it is. So can I ask any member if they truly think that this Assembly would be better equipped to come to the right decisions on those items if we reserved a few seats in this Assembly for people who'd been elected on an island-wide basis? Would it genuinely improve our decision-making on those propositions? Really? Of course it wouldn't. It would just mean that sat in this Assembly were people who we referred to with different titles. That's the only difference that would be. We'd say Senator so-and-so instead of Deputy so-and-so. It would have no impact at all. And so the matters that we're considering on these, in this state sitting are matters that are of island-wide importance. They're not for any particular district or any particular parish. And so what does it matter what bias or what balance you're trying to strike by having a proportion of the membership of this Assembly given a different title? It simply has no impact. But sir, the aspects that I want to confine the last portion of my speech to is this issue of public opinion, where we have had multiple comments made based on what they heard on the doorstep, which are nothing more than anecdote. They're not real evidence or real polling for how the public of Jersey actually feel on this subject. And despite comments in the previous debate from some about the lack of consultation with the public on this, in fact, sir, in 2013, we had the greatest exercise of public consultation that there has ever been on this subject. Firstly, with the work of the Electoral Commission, two of its members are deputies in this Assembly, and then we had a referendum. A referendum is, of course, the greatest act of consultation you can have, because you ask people who are interested in the subject to come out and cast a vote and take part in it, and we, at least in theory, tell them that the conclusion they arrived to will be counted for something. So when we did that, 80% of those who came to vote voted for options which did not include senators in it. The winning option was basically the system that we've got now, that we adopted in time for the last election. And many of those who didn't vote in that referendum for this option, like myself, sir, I didn't vote for the winning option in that referendum, I voted for option A, have reconciled ourselves to this system on the basis of compromise and taking Jersey forward and saying, okay, I don't get everything I want, but for the interests of the island and the interests of democracy, what can I compromise on to at least take us forward, which is what I did and what many of us who don't ideally, who wouldn't pick this system if we had a blank canvas, did as well. By reintroducing senators, we're not going forward, we're going backwards, and we're going backwards to a system that was given to us by the British Home Office in 1947, not one that was organically created by the people of Jersey through our own processes and adopted in a democratic referendum. But so if we want to go by some anecdote, at least, sir, we can look at the response that we could observe when this proposition was laid. Sir, I witnessed, at least on social media, about 99% of the commentary that came forward on this being extremely negative. And so I'm going to give some of those people a voice. I'm going to read out some of what those people said. And for those members who heard people speaking positively about the reintroduction of senators on the doorstep, you know, despite that a referendum had taken place proving that in all 12 parishes, a substantial majority came forward for the abolition of senators. This is what people have said about this debate and this proposition. Waste of taxpayers' money. They had that debate before and lost, so they should get on with more pressing issues. Why can't they debate something useful and of benefit to the island and islanders instead of wasting more money and time on vanity projects? If you don't like being called a deputy, get out of the State's chamber. It's a title for your office, and I could think of a few titles for you lot, but they wouldn't print them in a family newspaper. Another said, we've only just got rid of them. Why would we want them back? Time wasting. This has been voted on and should not return again until after the next election. Much more important debates to be had in the next 3 years. This next one is not parliamentary, so I won't read that one. It's all about status, so stop time wasting. This is not the Roman Senate. I mean, that is true. If they're not wasting time by debating senators again, then they're debating their own poor behaviour. What for? They could not make good decisions, it's just role-playing. It's a shame one politician's bringing this back to the States for a vote again. I'm sure there's more important things we could get on with in the parishes and bring this back rather than bring this back to the States. We should just get on with the day-to-day running and do their jobs, not go back to the past. Pathetic, going backwards. What's wrong with our politicians? Why don't they stop time wasting and do something people actually care about, like getting a hospital sorted? Some politicians have nothing better to do than wasting taxpayers' money once again. No, please, get on with building houses and a hospital, please. You're spotting some themes here, members. What a waste of time, so there's no more pressing business. Do you know, at this point, I am really repeating myself, but this is the bulk of opinion that came forward when this was announced that this Assembly would be debating this proposition. And so, sir, I ask members, as we rightfully did last time, to reject this proposition, first on the basis that the arguments made in its support are so manifestly flawed and can be evidenced to be wrong, but because it will not improve the nature of how this Assembly works, whatever your politics are, and because, sir, despite what some people may have heard from some people on the doorstep, the tangible evidence, that of that referendum, shows that there is better public support out there for a more rational, simple and fair electoral system like the one that won that 2013 referendum, which is essentially the system that we have now. And the option that came last, sir, with 20% of the overall vote, is the one that this proposition asks us to go back to. I ask members to reject it. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Taddeo.
Thanks, so I'll carry on the speech. We were joking outside about if we had rules in standing orders to do with just a minute, and then we did have the bell there. I'm going to continue in a slightly different vein. I think Deputy Mezek has made a good opening speech. It's important to say it's Deputy Mezek who used to be Senator Mezek, and who knows what he might be in the future. I think he could be anything he wants to be. Very, very serious point there. Of course, there have been senators in this Assembly who are now deputies. I don't see them being any less valued than they were before. They're sitting here in front of me. They're sitting here to my left, my physical left, and I don't think they're any different to what they might have been if they were senators. And the idea that they would somehow care less for the island now that they're deputies, and that they would be unduly swayed by the constituencies, the smaller constituencies that they represent, just because they're deputies. And I think the same argument has to go for constables. When we're in this Assembly, and I think some of the things we've heard in the previous debate were quite frankly bordering on being offensive to us as individuals and to the integrity, I think, of members more generally, is that you can't have it both ways. On the one hand, we seem to want to say you're better off to have senators in the mix because they're not bound by a constituency, but at the same time, their whole constituency is the island, and therefore they have a better mandate, and that they're more in tune maybe with the public opinion. There are lots of reasons why that doesn't follow. And I would like to think that, especially when members end up in government, it's irrelevant whether they're a senator, a deputy or a constable, because they look out for the whole island, and I think that we all do that in whichever role we play. So I won't rise to any bait that has been set in the previous debate, either about the workload that members engage in. I would simply say that members work differently in this assembly, and I think we all have workloads. And I was told when I was very young, don't point the finger, because when you point the finger, you've got three pointing back at you. So I would suggest that if one of the motivations for lodging this kind of proposition is because you have trouble getting members to serve on scrutiny, and you think that somehow bringing senators back will mean that it's easier for you to fill your scrutiny panel, there may be other reasons that you're struggling to fill a particular scrutiny panel. I'll leave it at that, sir. So now, looking at this actual debate that we're left with, the actual mechanics of the proposition, I think we're left with a complete dog's dinner, and it would have been much better if we'd have accepted the amendment. Because the amendment at least told us what we would have had. We would have had 9 senators. There would have been certainty. At the moment, we've got a complete wide-ranging option here. And I can't see, and I will temper this with another side of the debate, so this is the for, the against, and the for, is that what on earth are PPC supposed to do with this amendment now? Because it gives them such wide-ranging latitude, and I think it's important for us to say either whether we support this, but if you do support bringing back senators, what kind of structure should we bring back senators in? Because we're simply told that there can't be any increase to 49 members, so that's fine. So there has to be 12 constables in the states, and there needs to be at least 1 deputy for each constituency. So that gives a vast amount of options about how many senators we could have. Let's try and do the maths. If you have to have 12 constables, that leaves 37. And if you have to have 1 deputy for each district, that leaves 9. So 27 minus 9 is 18, right? Am I doing the maths correctly? 27 minus 9 has got to be 18. So we could have anything from 1 senator to 19. 18. Let's get the figures right. 19. And so you see, I'm even confusing myself here. And this is before it gets to a committee of 6 or 7 people, all of whom have different views as to whether or not we should be bringing back senators in the first place. And I think it would be interesting to have an election for potentially 18 senators or thereabouts, because I've been involved in the past in an election for 6 senators. When I first stood for election, it was on a different day, so you could stand for senator and deputy. So the first thing that the committee need to consider is, do you have different electoral days for senators and deputies? That reopens an entirely new debate, because the arguments that were put forward in the past for bringing the elections to a single day weren't simply to try and encourage voter turnout and to get rid of electoral fatigue and election fatigue, but it was also the very fundamental principle that you should be able to change your government and change your parliament at each election. And if you have a system where the elections are on a different day, or indeed, as somebody might suggest, why don't we have overlapping elections so that actually you have senators who stand for a 6-year term and that they're elected every 4 years, or they stand for an 8-year term and they're elected at staggered intervals of 4 years. So you have what we had in the old days. Essentially, we're going backwards. But it then does beg the question: is what's the point of having a Senate if you don't senators if you don't have a Senate? Okay, so because I've got a lot of free time on my hands and I'm not on a scrutiny panel, I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek because I am on a scrutiny panel. It just happens to be a sub-panel, and as an experienced member who served in both scrutiny and for a short while in government, I do like to actually try and use my expertise where I think they're best served. And so I happily join sub-panel. So I would happily join the PPC sub-panel if there is one set up to look at bringing this forward. And I would suggest, sir,
I'm not quorate. So would you please go and tell members we're not quorate?
Can we stop the clock as well?
Sorry? Sorry? Are you sure you want to stop the clock?
I'd like to reset the clock.
So that was an injury time. Do you have VAR, sir?
I'll give it a moment or two, then we'll have the roll call. We are. Well, we're now core 8, I think, and also we're not entirely certain whether the person who's participating remotely is present or not, because we're not in communication with them directly. So we are certainly core 8 now. If you'd like to continue, Deputy Talley.
And I think if we did bring back senators, we should have a rule that they're not allowed to leave the chamber. So, I won't bring that up, sir, because I do pop out when I need to as well. So, I will be making sure that if this goes through today, that PPC look at the full range of options, and one of them needs to include actually having a second chamber. And I don't say that lightly. I've given it quite a lot of thought, that if you're going to have different mandates for people, for elected members, and it's not my words, this has been said by I think it was probably Dr. Rennick for the Electoral Commission, but it may have been another commentator. If you're going to have different mandates, i.e. senators, then they should have a different function. And it doesn't make any sense in a unicameral system to have lots of different types of membership who are all doing the same role. They should have a different function. Now, I think that Jersey, if it does want to go down the senatorial route and bringing them back, they should have a different function, and it should be to sit in a second chamber, which doesn't have to be a different physical chamber. It could be in this very chamber, which is sometimes, I understand, used by the courts even. Who would have thought it? So senators could easily sit here on a second or third week when we're not sitting, and they could automatically or by option of having the matters referred to them do the second readings. And I think that's fundamentally important, because most parliaments around the world and in the Commonwealth actually have a separate process for second reading, which isn't done in the main assembly. And it's largely because you shouldn't be doing marking your own homework, right? So you send it off to a second chamber where a different set of eyes from people who have a different mandate, which would be an island-wide mandate. That would make perfect sense. Then you could have 6 or 9 or 12 senators. 12 is quite a nice number, isn't it? You know, I think it's got historic roots. There were 12 jurats. In the past, there were 12 parishes, there were 12 constables. So we could have 12 senators elected for however long to sit in the Senate, if we want to call it that, or le Sénat, as it should be called in French, and they could look at matters in the second reading, important bits of legislation. They could come back with those readings, and that would certainly lighten the load that scrutiny has to do, that legislative scrutiny that I know Deputy Balash has talked about in the past, which he I think I'm quoting incorrect, says that the Assembly doesn't really pay enough attention to legislative scrutiny and to that fine line-by-line reading that we could or arguably should be doing. So by all means bring back senators, but give them a specific purpose. So I'm going to leave my comments at that. I'm going to say, by all means, let's know what we're looking at here, and there are certainly arguments about bringing back senators, but if we do that, let's not make the same mistake that we made in the past. And I'll leave members with this thought, is that I fully understand the emotional attachment that there is to the role of constable. The role of constable is an ancient, medieval, as well as a modern role, which goes back to a point when they were the, if you like, the sole representatives in this assembly of the people. The rest of them were effectively appointed by the Crown, and they appeared in the assembly by, I would say, pretty arcane and undemocratic means. So it's natural that there has historically been that affinity, which is, of course, also linked to the parish assembly, and that idea that the parishes get together, speak to their constable, and are then represented in what used to be a very feudal assembly, which was linked directly to the royal court before, as we know, 1771. But the senators are a much newer model, and they were imposed on Jersey effectively by the UK. So what happened after the war is that in 1948 there was effectively a royal commission. It may not have been called that, but that's effectively what happened. And they said, you can't go on having jurors anymore, you can't go on having rectors, so let's create this new role of senators, which was indeed for a 9-year term. Now, that's how we ended up with senators in the first place. So it's understandable that a whole generation that have grown up with that and seen the simplicity, if you like, of being able to vote for senators and then getting some kind of representation from your vote will have some kind of affection. But I would say that it's completely misplaced. So if we are going to take a step forward today, let's not simply recreate what we've happened to have had in the past, but let's actually bring back senators and create a new role for them. But I think on balance, I don't think this proposition does that. I think what will happen is it will saddle PPC or a subcommittee of PPC with a completely unmanageable task, and that there will be too many competing interests that they won't be able to resolve, i.e. a waste of our time, which seems to be something that Deputy Scott keeps saying that we shouldn't be doing. We shouldn't be wasting time in this Assembly. We should be getting on with the vital pieces of work. I did listen to her on the BBC this morning, and she interestingly was talking about the economy. So she was saying actually, she was saying that the economy is in a mess and that we should be focusing on the economy. And I don't see the automatic link between bringing senators back and on the other hand, solving the issues we have in the economy. I think deputies and constables now and in the future are quite capable of hopefully getting their heads together and working on those serious issues. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy Ayer.
Thank you, sir. Here we are once again with a proposition that asks that the office of senator elected on an island-wide basis should be reinstated in time for the general election in 2026. If that sounds familiar, it's because those were the exact words that Deputy Gorst used in January this year when he proposed the exact same thing. The difference this time is that Deputy Scott wants us to agree that the number of deputies in the States Assembly should be reduced, although she does not state by how many, and that presumably will be left up to PPC to determine. But she infers that only one deputy for each existing constituency would be the absolute minimum requirement. I am sure that most members will find that suggestion quite deplorable. Indeed, I believe that even Deputy Gorst may find it difficult to support such a suggestion. Extending that logic, we would be left with one deputy in each constituency, 9 members, plus the 12 constables, plus 28 senators elected island-wide. But surely if we wish to dilute the value of each person's vote, why not include one representative from each parish as well? Or maybe include one of the procureurs de biens publics from each parish. This way we could ensure the most uncompetitive electoral system ever invented. Very few of those elections would be contested, and that, in my eyes, is what Deputy Scott's endgame is. But why would we alter a system which worked so productively in 2018? Not only was it the most competitive election in the island's history, the reform resulted in a most welcome increase in the number of women standing and being elected to this chamber. We would be throwing all that progress away for the sake of a single member's vanity. For it is a vanity project. It seems that Deputy Scott is determined to one day be addressed as Senator Scott, even though she has already proven herself unlikely to win a senatorial election. Stranger still, changing the means by which...
Deputy, that's a personal remark directed at another member.
Beg your
And
pardon.
it is also suggesting that the member's motives for bringing the proposition are self-serving, and that is directly in contrary to standing orders. So please withdraw that.
I apologise, sir. I'm happy to withdraw.
Thank you.
It is important to remember that under the previous system, a senator was not guaranteed a ministerial appointment. In my last term of office, I sat alongside Senator Valois, Moore and Pallett on the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel. These senators had respectively finished first, second and fifth in the island-wide election. Perhaps this is the raison d'etre of Deputy Scott's proposal to bring back senators to ensure that she has plenty of members for her EIA scrutiny panel. How did we even come to have the role of senator? The first such election...
Sir, sorry, can I have a point of order again? I do think that's personal. Clearly, if the States Assembly approves this proposition, it's not going to produce members from my panel because it won't exist at the time they are brought in. I would like the Deputy to withdraw that personal comment too.
Well, It is a suggestion of what the motivation might be, Deputy. I'm not going to direct you to withdraw that, but you've heard what has been said. I'll leave it up to you as to whether you withdraw it or not at this point, because it's a marginal comment in my view.
I'll allow it to stand if that's possible, sir.
Well, if that's your wish.
Thank you, sir.
Carry on.
How did we even come to have the role of senator? The first such election was on the 9th of November 1948, when 18 candidates stood for the 12 seats formerly reserved for jurats. The candidates who finished in the top 4 were guaranteed a term of 9 years. Those who finished 5th to 8th got a term of 6 years, and the last 4 won 3 years. This system meant that senatorial elections were held every 3 years, and 7 jurats stood for senator, even though they felt it was incompatible with their positions as judges of the royal court to seek votes, or even to appear at hustings. Nevertheless, the first senatorial election was reasonably competitive, probably because there were no other elections on that day. Those that were defeated on the 9th of November could then stand for deputy on the 8th of December later that year. The concept of having different elections on different dates to ensure a modicum of competitiveness does not seem to have occurred to Deputy Scott. The one major difference between the 1948 election and this proposal is that there were then 12 deputies elected for St Helier, 4 from each of the 3 districts, as compared to the possibility of only 3 representatives under Deputy Scott's scheme. If we are going to revert to the good old days, should we not include fair representation for St Helier? And I would like to mention there that I was most surprised with the Constable of St Helier for supporting the previous amendment, which would have removed 3 deputies from St Helier. It seems to me that Deputy Scott is cherry-picking which aspects of an antique system she wishes to reinstate. This proposal is clearly detrimental to the representation of our island's most popular parish. It is quite simply undemocratic. I must briefly address the insinuation that Islanders secretly yearn for more votes. Let us look back at previous senatorial elections. In 2014, people on average voted for 6.1 candidates out of 18. By 2018, that figure was 5.6 votes out of 17. Yet it is presumed by the proposer that Islanders want nothing less than an additional 9 or more votes when they currently struggle to select 4 deputies. But who are these people who are hankering for a return of senators? If we look back at the referendum of April 2013, only 20% of those that voted wanted to retain senators. An inarguable 80% voted to remove them altogether. I firmly believe that this remains the case throughout the island today. Indeed, if this proposition is successful, we would have no alternative but to put the question to the island in another referendum. And I noticed in the opening speech of Deputy Scott, she mentioned the 58% of submissions to the Electoral Commission report of 2013 who supported bringing back senators. Unfortunately, in the report, it lists all those people who actually put in submissions, and I actually counted them, and there were 379. So of 58% of that, if my maths is right, is 219.8 people who put in a submission for senators. And that compares to the 2013 referendum, where 16,779 people voted against senators. So I'm not too sure how representative that is. We must also accept the unfairness of the senatorial system. The cost of running a campaign island-wide is estimated to be between £8,000 and £10,000. This automatically excludes a very large section of society who would be unable to fund such a campaign. This is not the proper way of selecting representatives. We do not wish to encourage the formation of a plutocracy. In October of 2020, P139 was passed by this Assembly by 31 votes to 16, ensuring the removal of senators from this chamber. Of the 16 who voted Cont, 10 are no longer members of this Assembly. Perhaps they are hoping that Deputy Scott will be successful today to give them the opportunity of making a comeback. It took 20 years after the publication of the Clothier report to implement that vital change, which moved Jersey to a more democratic election model. We must not throw away the progress that has been made on a whim. The voting public are sick and tired of politicians debating how they will be elected instead of concentrating on the pressing issues of the day. It is time to stop navel-gazing. We must not continually try to revoke decisions that were made by the previous administrations. I implore all members to vote against this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Hart.
Thank you, sir. This was an issue on the doorstep, and that is why I'm standing up to mention it now. Deputy Mezek belittles their opinions. I did what the Council of St John recommended and knocked on as many doors as I could. I agree with Deputy Ward. We all deal with issues that are island-wide, sir, but this would not change if there was an island-wide senator. It is my electorate, sir, that wish to have a return to an island-wide vote. Some were disappointed that in our district they were unable to vote either for members of Reform or for members of the Jersey Liberal Conservatives, and they had to put up with candidates such as me. Although Deputy Mezek believes otherwise, electors do feel that they have had their democratic rights halved. In our district, the number of states members that electors can now vote for is 5. It used to be 10 in each parish. This means that they used to be able to vote for 20% of the Assembly, rather than now, when they can only vote for 10%. So we need 25 people to have a majority. It is the number of members of the Assembly that is important. If electors can vote for a greater number, they do have a greater influence. So we already have an excellent member of the PPC, who's unfortunately not here in the chamber at the moment, who has offered to look into this. And I do urge members to support my electorate who really want a return to an island-wide vote and support this proposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, sir. I think it's rather convoluted having 3 different positions in a unicameral legislature. And that is one of the reasons why it's been so unique for other politicians or diplomats to see our political system. And I think they then raise questions as to why is there senators, why is there connotabs, and why is there deputies? And finally, we have seen a degree of progress where now there is only 2 positions in the Assembly. And I think that provides a bit more clarity. And at least it gives more female candidates an opportunity to have a better chance during elections with the reforms that have taken place. I think had it been the case that deputies were elected to a parish level, women would be very much up against it, against your typical Conservative male politicians. And I think that the changes that were proposed by the previous Privileges and Procedures Committee are one which I would probably say is very progressive. And now we see 21 female politicians in this legislation. I think that is something that we ought to be very proud of. Now, when it comes down to the position of senator, it is very expensive. Okay, yes, it's an island-wide mandate. It gives people who are our constituents an opportunity to vote more politicians. However, I think our current system, in terms of when we're looking at our current constitution, it still is in need of reform. And I will explain why, and it's still relevant to the proposition, sir. Because when I look at the position of CONATAB, it is very much a decentralised role, and really it ought to be one with devolved powers at a parish level. Now, for CONATABs to be sitting in a national assembly, a national legislature, for me, does not really correlate for the responsibilities that a CONATAB must really prioritise. And the CONATAB has a very convoluted role because they need to try and prioritise and find a balance with parish matters and also National Assembly matters as well. And I think it has really been proven to me, sir, looking at the government plan and looking at the number of amendments, it is the non-executive deputies who've been lodging amendments, and there has only been one amendment lodged by a CONATAB. And I don't blame the CONATABs here, but all I am saying is the CONATABs have a tremendous role, a tremendous responsibility, and their workload is doubled because they are doing two roles. In essence, when you look at the deputies in the non-executive and the executive, there is one role, and our role ought to be that we are broaching things with an encompassment of policies for island-wide issues, and that's the whole point of having a National Assembly. Now, I would rather regard a devolved political system where the CONATABs are supported, looking at, say, councils similar to other jurisdictions where there are other politicians at a decentralised level to provide that cross-check and balance, because at this moment in time we don't really see that happen. And the CONATABs have a great degree of responsibility, and there is nobody really there to support them because there is a disconnect between the deputies who are elected to the constituencies, who really have to focus on the island-wide issues, and they don't really have the time to then focus on the issues at a devolved and parish level, or as we now are in a position of being representatives in a constituency. And so, even when I look at myself, I was elected to St Helier North, I was third out of 4 seats that were available. And I think for my electorate, they can actually say that as a politician, I've delivered, and I've delivered, 7 politicians I think I've passed through this assembly. And, what difference does it make if I was standing as a senator or a deputy? As long as I am affecting change, that's the important thing, and that's what people will judge me on. Now, I think there probably needs to be more clarity politically, because at the moment, when we're looking at our current constitution, we see all of these independents coming forward, and it's individual mandates, and it's very difficult to try and enact changes because we don't even know one another politically until we're in here, and then we kind of have an understanding of where everybody is and where their political leanings are. And I think that is probably one thing that is really hindering the Assembly to a certain extent, and that's probably the reason why I do support seeing political parties, because that's probably going to provide us with more clarity in the long run, because at the moment all we seem to be seeing is a short-term vision, and it's a similar political cycle every 4 years. And I don't see how electing senators, and it doesn't matter how many senators we are electing, how we are going to improve engaging the public, but also how are we going to move the island forward, because we have some serious issues. And I think it's been very clear that, yes, on the doorstep, many people were disappointed with the decision that senators would no longer form part of Jersey's constitution. But at the same time, 18 months in, people are questioning, well, what are they doing? Why are they spending time debating constitutional reform to reinstate senators when we've just got rid of them? And I totally understand that sentiment. You look at Facebook, you look at Twitter, most people are starting to question us now. And even looking at, say, something like Robert Dahl, he would always say, politicians who represent the interests of their people will build tolerance. Even if they're unsuccessful, people have confidence that actually their politicians are doing the right thing. And what I do see here is the public are becoming more intolerable because of us, because we're not delivering what we should be doing as a collective. All we seem to be seeing is, individuals coming forward with proposals, and they may be accepted and, okay, we've got some things across the line. But there is no collective approach, and it's very disjointed at the moment. And I think what we ought to be doing for the remainder of this 2.5-year term that we have, we've really got to be working more effective with one another, sir. Because if we do not work with one another, and if we are not willing to come up with an agreement, an aligned agreement, then what we will start to see is a fractured States Assembly that is going to appear more and more conspicuous. And I think we've already seen that this week. We've also seen, say, some members in the executive who have commented about their own executive and also in a very negative way. And that, for me, is just not acceptable. You're either in the executive and you are a team, or if you don't want to be there, then go. So that's all I need to say, sir.
Very much. Deputy Farnham.
Thank you, sir. Somebody said to me in the coffee room I droned on a little bit, so I'm going to be short and sharp. There's been a lot of anecdotes, and Deputy Mezek, he's nodding his head, and he chided me, sir, and other members for the anecdotes on the doorstep. And then he presented to give us a load of anecdotes himself, sir, about what people had said to him and social media and so on and so forth. But I prefer to, there are two means to anecdote. One is an account regarded as unreliable or hearsay, and the other one, sir, which I always use these, a short, amusing or interesting story about a real incident. So I just wanted to say there are a lot of members throwing up smoke screens here, a lot of members who spoke passionately in favour of retaining the island-wide mandate not so a few months ago, or in February of this year, who are now speaking passionately against it. Maybe we have to come to the conclusion that times are changing, sir. And it's disappointing that all through this whole escapade, it's been the members of this assembly with the fewest votes, sir, who have kicked out the members with the most votes, sir. And I'm sorry, but I think that was wrong all the way through. The last referendum attempt we had was completely flawed. And attempts to have a referendum on the question of the island-wide mandate have been rejected. And it would be rejected again now, because members of this assembly, I think, would be probably scared of seeing the answer, scared of the strength of feeling of islanders. But I think that probably is classed as progress. I don't think it is. I think this assembly, in relation to representation, have let islanders down. But having said that, sir, I do respect the views of members, and we do have to move forward, and I undertake to move forward with whatever political system we have, although I would still urge members to support Deputy Scott's proposition, and I would urge the members who might have persuaded other members to vote against my amendment because it was too restrictive, and we should give PPC the opportunity to do the work. So I say to those members, be true to your word and support Deputy Scott's proposition and let PPC do the work. But I doubt that will happen, sir. I think we're probably heading in a different direction. I don't think it's progress. I predict, sir, that the bailiff won't be chairing this assembly for too much longer. I predict, sir, that the constables will be gone. They're already getting closer to the door. The senators sat there not so long ago. They'll be out. And that is where we are heading. And if that's what our modern society wants, then so be it. But I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's the best, most democratic way of managing our affairs in this unicameral system, sir. But I would like to thank everybody for participating. So those are my views. And I urge members to support the proposition and give PPC the opportunity to come up with something. Thank you.
Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I have to say I don't agree with the previous speaker. Last year, I was lucky enough to discuss elections with election expert Adrian Lee. We discussed some of the concerns over all-island voting. Firstly, the high expense of running a senatorial campaign, as mentioned already by Deputy Ayer. And secondly, that those who are already known are at a huge advantage. For these two reasons, senatorial elections work against diversity and favour both the rich and those who are already well known, For example, those who work in the media. In contrast, our current electoral system has brought us the most diverse chamber ever. And before reviewing and improving this system, we need to give it more time. Above all, I really don't think we should be discussing this today. We have so many more important matters we should be debating. It does seem like a waste of time. To sum up, I mirror the points made in Deputy Mezik's speech, and I agree entirely with the Constable of St John's point, which was, let's not go backwards. And I urge members to reject this proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Conor Tarbison. John.
Thank you, sir, and I appreciate the leniency you gave me yesterday. As Deputy Scott said, I was tired. Sir, but I rise again to speak because one of my constituent deputies said that the majority of the people in that district wanted the role of senator. So notwithstanding what Deputy Luce said this morning, I thought I'd look at some of the facts. So in St Lawrence, 23.7% of people voted to retain senator. In Trinity, 29.6% voted to retain senator. And St John, 24.2% voted to retain senator. Overall on the island, 19% of people voted to retain senator. So I have to say, although I do agree with the deputy often, on this case I don't. And in St John, sir, 348 people voted for the current system that we have. ANC combined also polled 348 people. So I'm quite happy to stand here time and time again to say I've got a mandate from the public of St John to vote to not have senators. Thank you, sir.
So could the Constable clarify, was he referring to the results of the 2013 referendum?
It's up to you whether you give way.
More than happy to do so, and if the deputy would like to look at his district, he'll see similar results. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Redworth.
Thank you, sir. When I worked on Newsnight, we had a favourite trick we used to deploy to prick the pomposity of politicians. We'd go out onto the streets of a town or city somewhere in the UK, armed with A4-sized photographs of the cabinet. Then we'd ask members of the public to identify the names of ministers, without telling them they were politicians. The public would reliably misidentify various ministers as characters in soap operas or football managers or the like. I suspect that if you pulled that stunt today and went down King Street with a picture of me, most people would be equally confused. The point is that most people don't spend their time obsessing over politics. Not today, any more than they did when I was on Newsnight. We delude ourselves if we think otherwise. Inasmuch as they do think about politics, they want us to sort out problems, to address the issues that matter to them. So the first question I ask myself regarding this proposition is, how much does the person on the Corbière omnibus care about this debate? I think we all know deep in our hearts that most islanders do not care. Deputy Mezik made that point to good effect. We're answering a question no one is asking. We're debating issues about which the public have little or no interest. There is a minority of the population, heavily represented, quite possibly overrepresented in this assembly, who passionately believe that the removal of the senators from this chamber was a great injustice. Having failed to persuade the assembly to bring back the senators earlier this year, they're back for another go. The trouble is the arguments haven't changed. So I ask myself, what has changed over the course of this year? Only one thing has changed, sir. Those in favour of bringing back the senators believe that this time they can win. They have located one or two switchers and hope that this will be enough to get it over the line this time. And I think we can see that that's the case by the number of times the debate was postponed because various people were not going to be in the assembly to vote in the required direction. And I have to say, I don't think this is a great way to go about resolving an issue of great weight and about which this assembly is clearly divided. Given the seriousness of the issues, the thinness and lack of coherence of the report and arguments accompanying this proposition is particularly worrying. Deputy Mezek has already dealt with the argument that having senators back will encourage immigrants or finance workers to get more involved. But I would ask this central question: what exactly are we trying to achieve? It's frequently mentioned that increased turnout would be an aim. Well, thankfully, there's been some research on that conducted after the last election. A paper has been produced by the Policy Centre, which asked people who didn't vote why they didn't vote. 30% said it wouldn't have made a difference. 28% said don't trust the political system. 24% not interested in the election. 22% don't know enough about the candidates. And don't know and loss of the island-wide senator vote recorded 3% each. 3%. 3% of the public didn't vote because they couldn't vote for senators. Every time we debate this issue, sir, we slide further into irrelevance in the public's eye. They don't care about this stuff. Do you know how many times the Youth Assembly have chosen to debate this issue? None, not once. Let's look at some of the other points that are made. We've already heard arguments about the idea that because you get more votes, you somehow have more voting power. That's not true. It is said, and I think this is a central argument, that the senators are the most democratic of the elected officers. And that, as others have pointed out, is simply not true. It's a myth. There is no single way of measuring the quantum of democracy encapsulated in each class of state member. It depends how you define democracy. More than that, we should not even be thinking about more or less democratic members of our assembly. What does that say about those not touched by the superior status of senator? The less democratic members, deficient in their democratic mandate, carrying less authority, waiting perhaps for the day when they can ascend to the higher status of senator. Sir, our focus should not be on creating a supposed elite cadre of more democratic members. Our focus should be on creating a more democratic assembly, the whole thing. And the truth is, as several members have pointed out, that is what we have now. A more democratic assembly than the one it replaced, because the representation of each electoral district more accurately reflects the population that lives there. In an island-wide mandate, those areas that have the highest turnout gain the greatest say. It's also argued that the senatorial elections provided islanders with an opportunity to collectively discuss and consider key issues of interest to every person in Jersey, not just matters relevant to one parish or district. Again, that depends, doesn't it? Hustings with 9 candidates elected will mean upwards of 20 candidates standing, probably more, all on the same platform. A 2-hour meeting, public meeting, will allow around 5 minutes for each candidate to speak in total. The alternative argument is this: not having the senators compels every district election to be about island-wide issues as well as local issues. And that is indeed what happened, certainly in St. Brillard. Remember, we would be going back to exactly the same system that we said for about 2 decades wasn't working. For all that time, the one point of consensus in all the arguments about electoral reform was we needed to change the system. The disagreement over what should replace it. Now we've finally managed to create a new system, and immediately some members want to go back to the past. I would urge members to vote against this proposition. We have more important things to do. It's the wrong answer to the wrong question asked at the wrong time.
Does any other member wish to speak on the debate? Deputy Lewis.
Thank you, sir, and I'll be brief. I did promise I would say a few words in this larger debate. Sir, I'm a deputy. I was elected deputy of St Martin's. I'm now a deputy for St Martin's and Grewville. And in my position as deputy, I've always been very clear of my roles and responsibilities, because one thing that does not appear when you look at an official publication in the parish of St Martin's, for example, is that the deputy is part of the municipality. And I've always been very clear about that. My role as deputy is to represent the people of St Martin and not the parish itself. It's interesting, therefore, sir, to hear that what I was told on the doorsteps when I knocked on doors before the last election was not real evidence of anything at all. And that's what Deputy Mezek said, which I found interesting. We've also heard that politicians who represent their interests of their electorate are doing the right thing, which Deputy Andrews said in his speech. But so I'd just say this to members. In the past, I voted for change. I voted to do what I thought was the right thing, but it's been made absolutely clear to me on the doorsteps of St Martin and Grewville before the last election that my electorate, the people who have put me in this assembly, are extremely unhappy. Everyone I spoke to, literally everybody I spoke to, mentioned the loss of senators. So I will be doing what I'm elected to do, which is to represent those people who voted me into office today, and those people have told me that they very much want senators to come back, and I will vote accordingly. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member wishes to speak? Deputy Rob Ward.
Thanks, sir. I wanted to add a slightly more positive approach, is the word I'm searching for, to this, and then look at what we have now. So we have a greater and more equal representation for different districts, and I want to start off by saying I have to address this false dichotomy between the constituency issues and island-wide issues, because we deal with island-wide issues all of the time, be they about we voted on landlord licensing, that's an island-wide issue. We vote on tree regulation, it's an island-wide issue. I'm really trying to find one that is purely for my constituency. I can think of one, sir. It was the hopper bus going to Springfield. I remember that one, sir, and I lost that one anyway. So therefore, even in my representing my constituency, I lost. But at least we tried. And so that is a false dichotomy. But what we have now, let's look at the positive that we have now. We do have an assembly that is more reflective of our population. It's not perfect. But so I want to say that again. Think. We have an assembly that is more reflective of the people that we represent, of those differences, be it age, gender, culture, background, race, creed, religion, colour, all of these things. It is getting better. And that is a really healthy thing for a democracy. As chair of the CPA, sir, I like to go to represent Jersey and be able to be really proud of our democracy. And I think anyone who's been with me, whether they agree or not with my politics, would say that I would stand up and say I am very proud of the direct democratic process that we have here, that we can bring to the Assembly. Like I've said so many times that people get tired of it, but it's a really important thing to have. So when we look back, the only real island-wide thing we've had to look at senators was the referendum all that time. I desperately hope we don't go down the road of another referendum and spending all of that money to get a view, because that's what will happen if we adopt this. There will be a referendum, because that will be the only way to be certain as to what we want to have, to come up with a decision about how we're going to do this. And I personally see, sir, that is not the referendum that would be a useful use of our money. And I think that's what puts members off from voting. And let's talk about that. We have an opportunity in the next 2 years that is left there within our constituencies to be really in touch with our constituents. It's improving. We now have 5 in St Heliers Central for all of that dense population that's growing and growing all of the time. We work really hard. We're involved in things all of the time. And I really don't like this notion that because we may not be ministers that I don't know, it just seems to be a suggestion that we're not working as hard or we're not as involved involved. That is certainly not the case. And if I've got that suggestion wrong, then I apologise, because it is simply not true. We do scrutiny, I chair a scrutiny panel, a large scrutiny panel. I also work a lot with constituencies. I've got to a point actually where I'm saying to my colleagues, and they're probably looking at me saying, can we share some of these things out, please? Because I can't handle this one. I don't know what I'm doing. And that's another beauty of this. I am not a specialist in every area, but I can go to my direct colleagues within the constituency or across St Helier and say, I think you know better about this than me. Could you help me with this? And that constituent gets a better, more direct and specialised help in what they want to do because of that situation. And when I look back at the report, I can honestly say I have no idea what we're trying to achieve with this main proposition. And I listened on the radio this morning, and I'm afraid I could not understand what the coherent argument was that was being put forward about the economy and what we're doing with deputies and senators. And I say that because we have to be so careful that we don't bring this world of confusion to something that is working now. What we have to do is focus our efforts collectively in making what we have now work well for people in our constituencies to the very best of our abilities. And it is not a waste of money to support people in their constituencies, to provide that resource so that people know where we are, where they can get hold of us. So there's a safe place for us to discuss difficult issues with our constituents so that we can assist them. That is safe for us, it is safe for our constituents, that is safe for everybody. That is vital, and that is a direct democracy that we have here on a small island that we need to address. And the notion that we can have another type of states member that might have more validity than a deputy in this, but have the same level of vote, just does not make sense. And there comes a point in an argument or in a discussion where you have to say, I'm afraid it simply does not make sense. And I've got to say that there have been times that as an ex-teacher, I've stood in these debates and thought, we have to start the lesson again because nobody's understanding here. I would have left the classroom thinking, I didn't present that very well. Nobody really understands. I mean, it's usually atomic theory, but in this case, it's around what we're doing with senators and what democracy is. And I want to suggest this. If we want to talk about how we have a really democratic island-wide representation, there is a really good way to do it. And that is through a really consistent manifesto across all consistencies. What do you stand for? What are you going to do? And as somebody who's been involved in a political party from day one, and we're 10 years old next year, and you're all invited to the party, do come along. Genuinely, you're invited. Okay? We have consistently, across this island, put one manifesto out. That would be our government plan. People would be voting for what we would do. It is clear we have been consistent. You might not like it, but at least we've been consistent. And that is the way that you get small constituencies and you get real democracy. People know what they're voting for, and they know the person they're voting for, and they know why they're there. They are not detached from their constituents because they're above them. They're directly involved locally with those constituents. And by increasing the number of parishes that deputies have been involved in, there's more constituents they've got involved with. That's a good thing. More people are seeing you and asking you for help and saying, what do you do? That is the way we're going to get people voting. Now, we will always have trouble getting equity in voting, i.e. the numbers that turn out in different areas. In the centre of St Helier, we have a transient population too often, people moving from place to place, changing address, perhaps not knowing even if they're qualified to vote, where they can vote. That's what we need to work on. To say to people, you can vote. It's easy for you to do that. It's easy for you to register, and you have a duty to go and vote. That's what we should be discussing in this assembly and what we should be doing. Not let's go backwards and have somebody who's more important than you are as a deputy, but I want you to still vote for this deputy, but they're more important for you when they come to the assembly. So vote for them as well. Oh, you don't really know who they are. Don't worry, because you're not going to see them anyway, because it's going to be your local constituent deputy who's not as important as them, but they're going to come in and vote for anyway. It does not make sense. And that's when people look at it and say, this is a system that isn't going to work for me, and I'm not going to get involved with it. So I think that one of the things we have to do is to look very, very carefully as to why we keep coming back to this debate. And I believe that the reason we keep coming back to on this debate is we have a disconnect locally and within our constituencies that is improving now because of what the changes we've made and the validity of what we do. Every time we talk ourselves down, and we do that, we always do that thing about here, oh, it's warm in here, it's because of all the hot air. That doesn't help us in our profession, in our role, in our job, call it what you will, as political representatives on this island. We need to take ourselves seriously, we need to take others seriously, and we need to take our constituents seriously. And we do that by locally being really involved. And so I would make a plea. We need to run this system through again. We need to get to the next election with the way it is. And so that we can say to people, this is what we've done in the last 4 years to you locally, to you nationally, if you want to say nationally across Jersey, and this is what has happened in terms of the influence in the Assembly. We haven't lost it as individual deputies. Whether you're in government or not, you've still had an influence, and this is what you've tried to do, this is where you've been successful, this is where you haven't, but that is what your democratic representative is doing for you. And I want to be able to be very proud of the work I've done. Doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with me. And it's actually quite nice that there are some people I know in my constituency I know will not agree with me, but they still say hello and we have a chat and we talk about why we disagree. That's intelligent, thoughtful, kind politics where you can still be true to yourself and you can know the people that you're representing. But to detach that by an island-wide mandate because of some notion that it's more democratic, I'm afraid is simply incorrect. And we are missing an opportunity we made for ourselves last time and we're about to throw away. So there's a phrase, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're not doing that. We're doing the baby, the bathwater and the bath, and then saying to some people, you're not even allowed in the bathroom. And we've got to stop this nonsense. Please, let's just let this system run through again, sir. Let's show our value day to day in our constituencies to the people we represent. And if they don't like us, they get someone else in next time, but they know where they're voting this time and they know what they're doing. And I mentioned something that hasn't been mentioned so far. All of that change went through via COVID, during COVID times. You're not going to see the positive impact as much as you should have, as you should have, because of the effect of COVID. We're seeing it everywhere, and we're seeing the impact of that now. Let's be realistic about this. We made a change to our electoral system. That's why it's got to run through in times that are much more normal, in inverted commas, in terms of without that pandemic and its drag on society. So, sir, please, I ask people, and it's not about just changing. It's about perhaps understanding more of the role that we have as politicians, growing into those roles and maturing, all of us, and that's not just about age, in terms of the work that we do and understanding the nuances of what we do. Because it's like any job, you don't know it until you've done it. And there are surprises around every corner. So, sir, I plead, and I say to people, please, let's keep this going for another term. Let's get the election going again. If eventually we can prove genuinely it doesn't work, then I will be one of the first to say that personally. So I think we do quite well as a party in a senatorial election and island-wide even. But that's not the value of that. Is not the importance is our local contact and the way that we can move things forward. So please reject this proposition. It does not work. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Bush.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to...
I'm sorry, Colin.
Sorry.
There were two lights on at the same time. I called on
sir.
Deputy Balash. I'll call on you after that. Thank you.
So this has been a long and tortuous journey. And I think it may be useful to reflect on how it started. It probably began with Clothier and the introduction of ministerial government. But one key event which is in my mind was the election of the then Senator Le Sueur as Chief Minister. Senator Le Sueur had, in his earlier capacity, introduced a goods and services tax, which had been highly controversial. But he was in the middle of a senatorial term, And when the next election came around, I think in 2008, Senator Lesueur did not face election. And for those who were disgruntled with the introduction of GST, it was very curious to see that a politician who had not faced the electorate was suddenly appointed as Chief Minister. And it was, perhaps I should just say en passant that Senator Lesueur was a very good Chief Minister, in my view, one of the best. But his election led to the idea that there should be a single election day upon which every candidate should face the electorate. The number of senators were then reduced to 8 to accommodate that change, and they became elected on the same day as deputies on a single election day. And that, in effect, sounded the death knell for senators. What was the difference between deputies and senators thereafter? Absolutely nothing, as Deputy Mezek and others have rightly said. There was no difference, and they were, in effect, an historical anachronism. They harked back to the time when we had jurats and rectors in the Assembly, because, as we all know, senators were the consequence of the removal of those constituents. Then we had the Electoral Commission, 2012 and 2013, and its recommendations. And as Deputy Mezek, the Constable of St. John, have said, less than 20% of the electorate voted for an option which included senators. So option B has been largely enacted. I differ slightly from Deputy Mezek because it hasn't been entirely in its purity elected and effected, and I think the system would probably improve if it were enacted. 6 electoral districts is better, in my view, than 9. But I fundamentally, sir, agree with the Constable of St. John. What he said in the earlier debate was, let sleeping dogs lie. Let's wait for a little while to see how the new system beds in, and if it does need change, then we can change it. It's interesting that the Electoral Commission, on which Deputy Renouf and I both sat, took the view that the introduction of 6 electoral districts would in effect create 6 mini senatorial elections. And I don't know what other members' experience is, but for my part, I certainly find that people who approach me come from all parts of the island. I'm a deputy of St. Clement, but I think relatively few constituents in St. Clement have approached me on constituency matters. And I find myself acting, actually, as a surrogate senator. The Jersey Liberal Conservatives' manifesto commitment was to consider the reintroduction of senators, and my colleague in my party feels strongly that that should be considered. I have no objection to the PPC considering the possibility. I'm not sure that I want them to do so on the basis of a resolution that senators should be reinstated, and I'm therefore going to oppose the proposition.
Connaught St Mary.
Thank you, sir. What I was going to say has been slightly changed by the words of the last speaker. I was interested to hear one of his concluding remarks that he was frequently approached by members of the public other than from his own constituency. That suggests that therein lies a problem. Deputy Ward and yes, mentioned the word disconnect, and that is the key to my speech. As with Deputy Howell in her constituency, there is a disconnect between the parishioners of St Mary and the island-wide vote, and they do feel, rightly or wrongly, they are disenfranchised. That they felt that they had a say in government by being able to elect 8 members to the Assembly, whatever role they took on. And that deprivation of their being able to do so does actually reduce their connection with government completely. And I suspect that happens with many islanders too. They feel they have a greater part to play and a greater interest, a greater say in how things are going if they do have some major contribution to the form of the Assembly. In my own constituency, we are fortunate in that we have 3 former senators as our deputies. I suspect that having been former senators, that might well indeed have helped them be elected deputies. But that won't carry on forever, and there are those in the future in my constituency and other constituencies who will look at the Assembly and find that there are no one they have voted for holds ministerial office, and that is a relevant point, sir. Deputy Jern, in her speech, referred to legitimacy, and that is an aspect one needs to look at. I remember when the former deputy Andrew Green, as a deputy, had a major interest in health. He decided he wished to stand as health minister, but believed he could not do so unless he had the mandate of the public, and so he stood as senator. And that was his battle cry in his election campaign. And he was 3rd in the polls, and lo and behold, yes, he became health minister. That's a different matter. But all I was saying, sir, is that the members of the Assembly who come to the Assembly gain their seat with an island-wide mandate do have a certain amount of legitimacy, and that can be overturned by the members as a whole, of course, but it is something to recognise. I don't think that necessarily makes the senators a different category of persons once they're in. It does mean that the electorate are, as a whole, are contributing to the leadership of the Assembly, and which is, if not as important, certainly has some importance, set aside that the mere vote is not the mere votes which count, it is what they do and the path they tread. So, as I say, sir, following my responsibility to my electorate, I'm in no doubt, so that the majority of my constituents do wish return of senators in some form. And I voted against the previous amendment because it was too prescriptive. This one is sufficiently widely open to enable PPC to have a look at various aspects, and I shall therefore be supporting the proposition. Thanks, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate, and I call upon Deputy Scott to respond.
Thank you, sir. I thank members for their contributions to this debate. And I also thank the Privileges and Procedures Committee for their comments on the proposition. I've actually have said in the past that we are politicians, and it's important to learn from those we represent, and it's also our main role to learn from each other. And it's been interesting hearing the various contributions, which I will just respond to in a moment, because as politicians, I believe that we're often kind of reputed, we have a good reputation for losing focus and digression. And I'm no exception, but that has happened a lot in this debate. The interesting thing, I'm going to just move to, so I heard from Deputy Mezek, and I think this is interesting because when I hear people, I hear evidence of culture. I hear, and something that I've become familiar with, I believe quite a few people who are seen as the badges of diversity, you know, the women, this sort of thing, may well have become familiar with the way in which others speak for us. 11 men spoke on this proposition just now, 2 women. And the actual, you may see more women in the chamber, but does that really mean that inclusivity has become part of its real culture? To the point that we can even build on that and improve upon that. Because this proposition wasn't really inviting a history lesson, as well as some personal comments. It was inviting the chamber to actually innovate using what has happened before to make it better, to make this chamber more accessible and to improve its inclusivity. Because there are certain things that I don't see right now. I don't see men of colour. I don't see care workers. Sorry, did I miss there is a care worker? Sorry, then there is a care worker. But there are plenty of people, whether from different backgrounds, who currently aren't represented here. And the reason, we need to look into why. And to some extent, personal experience is relevant here. Deputy Mezek, yes, am I the first mixed-raced Asian in this States Assembly? You're not, people aren't too sure. Okay, well, basically, it's not a competition. Unfortunately,
I'm sorry, we're not having a conversation between members.
No, sorry. I did.
It's a speech.
Yeah. Okay. Election is a competition, actually. And when I sought election, I didn't do this to have the title of senator. And I do believe what's coming out to some extent is this concern that it's something that gives people a particular status and that people think they're better for having that title. And I really think that that's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I'm sorry if people have experienced that in any shape and form, that somebody's going around saying, I'm a senator and I'm better than you, or I've had more votes in my constituency, I'm better than you, or I'm a member of this party and I'm better than you, or I'm a man and I'm better than you. Because if you've had any of that, I sympathise, I truly do. It should not be happening. And we, as a States Chamber, need to stop that from happening. We need to recognise where we are going wrong and correct it. I'm also very conscious that when I stood for Senator, on the basis of my own feelings about the accessibility to the States Chamber, that I did attract a certain amount of contempt from specific members who are even here right now. What was I doing? What an upstart. I should have gone down the deputy role. And that remains in this States Chamber because there are still some people who think that that's what I was doing, that I was trying to prove I was better than anybody else. No, I learn from my States members. Maybe they might learn from my personal experience too, or maybe they're not ready for it. That's possible too. Because as far as I'm concerned, we all have something to bring to the party, and but not the political party perhaps, at this assembly. And we are all equal. In so far as our votes are concerned. But to actually suggest that we are all doing the same jobs, I'm sorry, Deputy Gardner actually mentioned this, but we clearly aren't. I'm not the Minister for Education. And I very much respect that she has a role that has certain requirements, and that looking at her skill set, encouraging people to come here with particular skill sets, bearing in mind that it's possible, and I actually am saying my experience is that a barrier has been created by the removal of one route there that actually will have an effect on people with certain skill sets, with a certain way of moving and integrating with this community, which is not necessarily little parcels of land, and actually deprive them of access to this state's chamber. There was a lot of talk about maths, and the whole point, really, when I first drafted this proposition, was to invite the PPC to look at the maths. And I've heard some very sort of back-of-the-envelope maths happening. Oh, if you have senators, that will mean that the electorate will get 0.5% rather than 1%. I don't know where those figures came from and how they're actually supported, but I really would like PPC to have a look at that. Basically, if the States Assembly is prepared to accept that having more routes towards this States Chamber actually encourages inclusivity, those numbers need to be looked at. And that would be their job. The power of vote versus the power of choice. Again, if you have barriers towards election, then you're decreasing the elector's choice. Now, I know, and I already said in my opening speech, that some people, again, have these connotations, associations with senator, like, well, it requires loads of money to stand. It doesn't necessarily. People have actually pointed to some exceptions, but I am, despite what people may say are my motives or even suggest that, without even having had a conversation with me about them, I'm actually very anti-abuse of power, particularly financial power. Whether to be beholden to a private donor, even a union, wherever the money comes from, ideally, you would not be looking towards other people just to get into the States Assembly to actually raise the funds. I don't believe we can necessarily make it free from day one, not particularly given the state of our finances and that sort of thing, but I do believe you can change the rules. If you take this first step, then you can follow up and do some of the things that we also need to be done to improve accessibility and improve government. The use of anecdotal evidence, I'll come back to that. Deputy Tadier, new people, yeah. I'm sorry, did I mention the economy being a bit messy at the moment, and that you really need to encourage people to understand numbers to come in? And if the senatorial route is a way of doing that, why put a barrier then there when there are some pretty complicated numbers to understand and work through? Deputy Arya, basically, I'm not, as I explained in my opening speech, and I've got this, sort of deja vu myself in terms of having said what my intentions were, which has not been to cull deputies. I do accept they have a role, but I also drafted the proposition to enable the margins of the work that can be done to enable senators to be introduced or reintroduced in a more constructive way, in a way that promotes and develops inclusivity, to bring that forward. We come back to the submissions to the Electoral Commission. I didn't write the Commonwealth Observers report. They referred to its findings. Some people have actually, and this includes the Constable of St John, I got it right this time, sir, and Deputy Ahia, who mentioned the referendum in terms of a source of data. But as we know, the referendum didn't give people the choices that they want. So we come back to square one. Didn't give the choice of having senators, having deputies of constituencies in the way that we do, and having constables too. The idea that, we had Deputy Andrews speaking about having 3 states members is conflict. Well, if that's the kind of way in which you want to approach diversity, I think maybe it would be why don't we just reduce the different types of teachers to 2? Why don't we reduce the number of types of doctors to 2? Oh dear, what a bit of an inconvenience that we've got different races or whatever. At least we've got, oh no, we don't have 2 genders, or do. You know, we've got to be able to accept that our electorate are capable of understanding 3 different roles in a unicameral chamber to bring together our resources to approach the work that we do in an organised way, and one that actually is more financially efficient. I'm going to come back. So when we come to our organisation.
Deputy Mayor, I'm afraid standing orders require that I interrupt you at 12:45. If you could indicate how much longer you think you'll be speaking, so members can decide if they wish to continue or move for the adjournment.
I believe I've got another 15 minutes, 10 minutes.
I propose the adjournment, please, sir.
Thank you.
Adjournment is proposed. You'll have the opportunity to continue from 2:15 onwards.
Yes, thank you, sir.